Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. Trevor, Sikkema, Dalton, Wasserman here with you guys to recap everything that we saw in the NFL for week 16. As we always do on the Grades Release Show, we're going to be giving you the top 5 graded players for every single team and every single matchup that we saw this past weekend. We're going to give you our most impressive, our most disappointing, and of course, the stat that told the story. Dig into some PFF stats. If you want to go see those for yourself, you can go over to pff.com, get yourself a PFF Plus subscription, and follow along here with us on the show. I am obviously not in studio. Holiday season has, us all over the place a little bit here, but Dalton, to quote Step Brothers, is there so much more room for activities now with me no longer there and you're just on the desk by yourself?
No, there's just more room for our producers behind the glass to give me their wrath, because that's all it is. I just have to deal with them by myself today. That's really what it comes down to. And surely they will be complaining to me and only me about anything I do today. So I have the studio to myself. They're kind enough to trust me with it. We'll see how it goes, and we'll see how much crap I take afterwards from them.
Just to get behind the curtain a little bit here for people who are watching and listening to the show and who have been the entire season. First of all, we love you. We appreciate you rocking with us. 2, before the show, Dalton often goes over to a whiteboard that we have there in the studio off camera, and he will write a play. And we're like 3 minutes to showtime. Like, we're 3 minutes from going live on the show, and Dalton will be talking to me, breaking down the play, and I'm like, Dalton, we're about to go live. What are you doing? And so I imagine that today you just did the same thing, except there was nobody there. Like, you were just like, it's as if I was still there. You were still trying to break down the play for somebody. So I'm hoping you were still able to get on the whiteboard today. Is that true?
Absolutely. There's 4 of them up there right now, and I'll explain during one of our breakdowns what it is. But there's actually 4 instead of just 1 or 2 today. I think I'm going to set a new record every week. By the end of the playoffs, I think I'm just going to have a whole playbook up there on one board.
Every single time that you have a play breakdown that you do on that whiteboard, you absolutely cook in whatever segment that you're going to talk about those plays. So the fact that you got 4 today, I'm even looking forward to which 4 those are going to be. Let's start with Sunday Night Football, though, as we get to the most recent game before we get to these other games. We'll, of course, talk about the Thursday and Saturday games as well, but we'll get to those after we get to Sunday Night Football, because it was a thriller last night. As a Bucs fan, I hated it, thought it was terrible, thought it was the worst game ever. No, I'm kidding. But congrats to the Cowboys, obviously. It was very entertaining down to the very end. Because the Cowboys won, let's take a look at their top 5 graded players first. For Dallas, number 1 on the list is wide receiver CeeDee Lamb. He is who everything runs through, and there's no shock there at a 79.4 overall grade. Linebacker Maris Liufau, somebody who, just want to say, I was a big fan of in last year's draft, really showing up. He's number 2 on this list, 78.2. Edge rusher Micah Parsons, surprise, in this top 5, 74.1. Cornerback Jordan Lewis, couple of huge plays in this game, which we'll break down a little bit, 72.2, and then number 5 to round it out, the other corner, Deron Bland, a 69.0. Cooper Rush in this game, a 71.8 overall grade. And then on Tampa's side of things, Vita Vea at the very top of the list with a 71.6. Rookie wide receiver Jalen McMillan, a 71.0. Center Graham Barton, 70.6. Defensive tackle Kalijah Cansey, a 69.0. And then linebacker J.J. Russell with a 68.6. Baker Mayfield in this game, a 70.2. Dalton, what was your stat that told the story as we begin to break down Sunday Night Football?
I think we've got a similar thing here, both of us, and it's something we've talked about for a while this season. Look, if the Bucs are going to make the postseason, Baker Mayfield and their offense is going to be the reason. And if they miss the postseason, it's going to be because of their coverage unit, right? Their back 7 has struggled for a long time. They struggled again in this game, especially in the first half. 6 times this year, they've had a coverage grade under 55, including this game. They are 1-5 in those 6 games, and the one win was the overtime win over Carolina. 50 coverage grade as a team since week 5. That's the 4th lowest in football. Between poor performance and injuries and just Todd Bowles not being able to get into some of the more complicated schemes he wants to get to, Cooper Rush was really able to tear him apart in the first half. And this secondary, there's weeks where they give up way too many yards, way too many points. Another thing, since week 5, they've given up the most passing yards in the league. They get in these shootouts, and the problem is they can't get any stops when they get into them. We've seen it both Atlanta games. This game, there's just been too many times where they can't get stops, especially in the passing game when they need to, and it hurt them again in this game.
Yeah, it's, missing your 2 starting safeties doesn't help, right? Antoine Winfield Jr., Jordan Whitehead, they're out of this game. The regularly scheduled corners were still out there. You had Jamel Dean, you had Zion McCollum, you had Tyke Smith, Christian Izien, who was a nice slot player for them last year. He's sort of that slot safety hybrid, so he was playing a lot of safety in this game. But mean, it hasn't looked good for the Bucs, and whether it's been their corners and some of the injuries that they've faced, a couple of those guys in and out of the lineup throughout the season, or the linebackers, roping the linebackers into it as well. I feel like the linebackers really outside of Levante David have struggled the entire season in coverage, but even Levante David really struggled last night. And so anytime that's the case, you combine that with their secondary woes, and it's just not going to look pretty. And it's what it was. The defense just did not look pretty once again for this team. And, I think it kind of comes down to Zion McCollum started the year really hot for this team. You thought he could have been maybe a CB1 type, but as he's cooled down a little bit, okay, Jamel Dean, he's more of that CB1, at least in terms of role and duties that he has. In my opinion, Jamel Dean's not really a CB1 type in the league. He's not really nice CB2, but because you're elevating him to a CB1 spot, well, then it's sort of a trickle-down effect of everybody else of kind of where he is starting things and who he has to cover. And like I said, when you're down Jordan Whitehead and Antoine Winfield Jr., it's just going to make it really tough. So the Bucs coverage was an issue in this game. 49.5 coverage grade versus the Cowboys, 0.370 EPA per pass in the first half. It really just come out of the gate, the first half of this game, for the coverage to be as poor as it was. It's been tough. It's been very up and down, and it's opened up the door for questions of, hey, is Todd Bowles as the head coach, given even the success that he has had for them winning the division and getting into the playoffs, like, is that worth maybe letting Liam Cohen walk out of the door to go be a head coach of another team? And I think that some of the defensive struggles for the Buccaneers at least bring up a lot of interesting questions or discussions that they're going to have over the next month, whether or not even they win the division and can make the playoffs. Who is your most impressive before we get to most disappointing?
Honestly, it was kind of tough to pick just one, but I think other than the turnover-worthy play late in the fourth quarter that really could have hurt him, the ball he threw right in J.J. Russell's chest, I thought Cooper Rush was really good in this game. I know he had a 70.7 passing grade, which sounds kind of average, but if I take out that one play, that rises by 8 points. And I think a big thing for me is he's starting to work downfield the last couple weeks. A 90 passing grade on 10-plus yard throws. Over the last 3 weeks, that's a 93. That's second best in the NFL. He's starting to just get comfortable, right? He's had enough starts now since Dak Prescott got hurt, and he had to come in, starting to work downfield to CeeDee Lamb and Kevontae Turpin, even Jalen Tolbert. I think we've seen the Cowboys have some speed to work with on offense, and they're starting to use that speed in that set of guys. Yeah, they might be small, but I think he's comfortable in the pocket. He's making the right reads. He's getting throws off downfield, and I think it's really kind of given some balance in this downfield passing attack. The last couple weeks we've talked about Rico Dowdle in the run game getting a lot better. In this game, not so much. The Bucs are pretty good at stopping the run. Obviously, Vita Vea, Kalijah Kancey, Levante David on the inside stopping the run have been pretty good. So Rush had to throw downfield in this game, and he made it happen. I was impressed with the way he played, honestly, outside of that one throw at the very end.
Yeah, Rico Dowdle struggled in this game. I mean, the Cowboys, just rush game in general, struggled. 1.8 yards per carry average for Dowdle, who going into this game had the most rushing yards in the league over the last 3 weeks by a wide margin, by almost 100 yards. Kyron Williams was second next to him. But Dowdle's been fantastic, and with the run game not playing well, Cooper Rush was able to play well. So I do think there's a good shout out. My most impressive is Vita Vea, and not just Bucs bias here. I have to do it literally just for one play, right? We mentioned that Vita Vea earned a 71.6 overall grade. He had a 77.0 coverage grade, which is normally not really something to note for a defensive tackle / nose tackle. But for Vita Vea, it is, because in the game's most crucial moment, or one of them, I should say, coming down to the wire, it's 3rd and 6, right above the 2-minute warning. And this team, no, I actually think it was right at the 2-minute warning, because the 2-minute warning went off, and then the Bucs still had the timeout because they didn't call it beforehand, which sort of a conversation that we don't need to go down that rabbit hole, because I'm gonna talk for an hour if we end up doing that. But anyways, Vita Vea is lined up as the left defensive end, and not just the left defensive end. He is in a stand-up 2-point stance over the right tackle of the Dallas Cowboys. The ball is snapped, and everyone to his right ends up slanting and blitzing the quarterback. And then Vita Vea immediately not only drops back, but drops to almost like a middle linebacker spot. It's a quick pass to the left side of the line of scrimmage. So he continues to move his giant ass all the way towards where the ball is, goes like a heat-seeking missile, and blasts the ball carrier to stop things on 3rd down, make the Cowboys punt, and give the Buccaneers a chance to potentially go down the field and win the game. We know they didn't do that, but an unbelievable showcase of athleticism for Vita Vea, who continues to marvel, it feels like, any week that he is out there on the field. But that play, to go from being a left defensive end in a 2-point stance to go all the way across the field to make that solo stop and hit that ball carrier the way that he did where the ball almost popped out. I mean, that was just an unbelievable play by a defensive tackle that I had to shout out there. Most disappointing for me before we get to your most disappointing, just the Bucs ball security and the hands I just have of these players, right? Think of obviously the Rachaad White fumbling the football to end the game, kind of like an anticlimactic play where it felt like Baker Mayfield was really on a roll, could have got him in a field goal range. Obviously, you're pumped about that if you're a Cowboys fan, and it was an incredible play to make a play on the ball and rip it loose and win that football game. So I don't want to take anything away from them there, but fumbling the football the way that Rachaad White did was disappointing. And then you go to the previous drive where, or actually it was 2 drives before that, excuse me, because they had scored on the previous drive, where Baker Mayfield hits Jalen McMillan for a bomb of what looks like a touchdown, and Jordan Lewis just ripped it straight out of his hands for an interception. I mean, that is something where, hey, if you get 2 hands on that football and you secure that, obviously we're probably talking about a different result for this football game. And so those 2 plays in particular, I think, killed this team, especially with where they happened with the third to last drive and then the very last drive that they had. So those ball security issues were the most disappointing for a team that looked like they were on a roll there in the second half to overcome what was a bad defense. But who's your most disappointing in this?
It's a guy you mentioned at the top, and actually Lavonte David. And I know he's a guy that we praise all the time, and we both believe eventually he should be a Hall of Famer. But tough time to have your lowest graded game of the season, 44.4. And I think especially in coverage, 9 catches allowed, 77 yards, 44.2 coverage graded. Just all night, whether it was short passes or the Jalen Tolbert touchdown up the seam or screens, for some reason he just looked a half step late consistently. He was just a little bit late, and it just hurt him in coverage. And there was a few big plays. I can even think of the Jake Ferguson long reception that came on a short pass that David was a little bit late on right before the half that cost the Bucs a field goal. The Cowboys got 3 points out of it. So I think he just had his toughest night of the season in coverage, and it really just kind of exemplifies on the back 7. You know you had a tough night in coverage when Lavonte David had a tough night in coverage, because he's rarely had those in his career.
Let's go back to the Saturday games. We'll start with Texans and the Chiefs here. Chiefs win this one 27-19. Top 5 graded players for Kansas City here in this game. Defensive tackle Chris Jones at the very top of the list, as he often is, with an 87.7. Edge rusher George Karlaftis, an 86.3. Safety Justin Reed, an 84.3. Wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins, a 78.4. Center Creed Humphrey, a 77.5. Patrick Mahomes in this game, excellent. 90.2 overall grade there for Mahomes. For Houston, Tank Dell was the top graded player on this game, and obviously heartbreaking, the injury that happened to him. And you just hope that everything's going to be okay with that knee injury and that he will be able to come back better than ever. But he graded before he left a 92.1, including catching that touchdown there. Cornerback Kamari Lassiter next on the list with a 78.2. Edge rusher Nico Autry with a 77.6. Guard Titus Howard a 73.6. Defensive tackle Mario Edwards with a 70.0. And then quarterback C.J. Stroud in this game with an 83.9. What was your stat that told the story here for this one, Dalton?
Yeah, so I think it's fitting that the Chiefs' top 2 pass rushers were their 2 highest graded players outside of Mahomes in this game, because in the second half, my stat is second half 68.8% pressure rate on C.J. Stroud. Their pass rush just took this game over late. Stroud under pressure in the second half, 3 for 9, 57 yards. They got 2 sacks on him, 62.8 passing grade. It was just too much, right? And they got pressure all day, but it really turned up in the second half, and he didn't quite handle it as well. We've talked about play to play, drive to drive, game to game. Play under pressure can be volatile, and that was the case in this game. I think the fact that the Chiefs pass rush, I think obviously Jones, because Chris Jones is going to be the Texans' biggest problem anyway, right? In this game, or if they're going to play the Chiefs in the playoffs, I don't know that they have an interior answer for that. Actually, I don't think they have one at all. But the fact that George Karlaftis, and he's actually my most impressive guy, I'll just skip to that, because the fact that he gives them a second a really good pass rusher in this game, which sometimes kind of wavers. We've seen games before where Chris Jones has 8 to 10 pressures and nobody else has more than 2. The fact that Karlaftis gave him 7 pressures, hit C.J. Stroud 4 times, had over a 20% pass rush win rate, those 2 guys really took over in the second half of the game. And even a quarterback as good as C.J. Stroud, when he's pressured on 11 out of 16 dropbacks, his life gets a lot harder, especially after you mentioned the unfortunate Tank Dell injury there, and he's running out of weapons. It's really just C.J. Stroud and Nico Collins in the passing game at this point. I think the fact that Jones and Karlaftis got so much pressure was the story of the second half of this game, which turned into the story of the entire game, and I was really impressed with Karlaftis. I thought it was the best that he had looked all season.
Yeah, no, it was a good combination there. And obviously, offensive line, we've talked about that as a woe for this Texans team. And the Chiefs were unfortunately a really good front to take advantage of a weakness there for the Houston Texans. For me, the stat that told the story was a quick game of the Chiefs passing game. I know that they showed this on the broadcast, but I was certainly noticing this as the game was going on, and the numbers spoke to it after the game was over. Mahomes passes on throws that were a time to throw less than 2.5 seconds. He had an 85.3 passing grade. 26 of his 46 attempts came with less than 2.5 seconds with the ball coming out of his hand. He had one big time throw. He had a 76.9 adjusted completion percentage and just an average depth of target of 4.3. So anytime you're getting the ball to your hands that quickly, well, the wide receivers don't have a lot of time to get down the field. So you figure that the average depth of target is going to be lower, but he was so quick, he was so decisive, and they were so confident still to execute a quick game passing attack here against the Houston Texans. And I wonder if it's because, hey, you look at those two corners and how much they have really succeeded. You look at how well Kalen Bullock has been playing as a ball hawk there at the safety level, and you say to yourself, all right, well, we have watched Derek Stingley, and we have watched Kamari Lassiter, we have watched Kalen Bullock be these players who are making big-time forced incompletions and even takeaways when we are passing it deep down the field. So the way that we are going to mitigate that, well, we're not going to give them those chances. We're going to hit them underneath. And obviously that kind of behooves the Chiefs anyways with their personnel that they have this season and just the flow of their passing attack and what seems to be working really well for them. And it just felt like in this game, they leaned into that more than we have even seen through other games this year. So the quick game of Patrick Mahomes, how he recognizes things pre-snap, knowing exactly where to go with the ball, and then setting that up, marrying that up with play calling to get that kind of an advantage. You saw that, and you saw a really good offensive output there for you, or for the Chiefs because of it. Most impressive and most disappointing. Who you got here?
I got Karlaftis as my most impressive as a pass rusher, aside from Chris Jones on that side. And then most disappointing, I think part of it does kind of go along with what you just mentioned about the Chiefs play calling in the passing game. Because look, if your offensive line can't protect you, and we know they've been shuffling tackles, they got Joe Thuney at left tackle now, they got a new left guard in, you got a rotation going at right tackle. We had Wanya Morris, I believe, finished the game yesterday. For me, Will Anderson had to do a little bit more. And I know, again, the quick game was mitigating the pass rush, but 53.5 pass rush grade, 58.1 run defense grade, only won 4 of his 33 pass rush reps. If the Texans are going to have any chance in the postseason, if these two teams meet again, they need Anderson and Hunter to play at an elite level. Hunter was solid. Anderson didn't give him a whole lot. Again, the quick game does mitigate that because, something I've said a lot lately for not just the Chiefs, but a lot of teams with bad offensive lines. If your line can't protect you, then you protect yourself, right? And I think Mahomes did a great job of it, but they're going to need more from Will Anderson to win games like this.
No, it's a great point, and one I could have or should have made really when we were talking about the quick game is, when you're struggling at offensive tackle and you're going up against two really good edge rushers, I mean, this was just an excellent game plan for the Kansas City Chiefs, and we'll see if they continue to do something like this and really emphasize that quick game on more than 50% of their passes, see if that's something that we could see more of them moving forward, or was this sort of just a, hey, we know what the Texans really want to do when it comes to the secondary, but also the pass rushers like you mentioned, this is how we're going to mitigate it, and I'm curious because I thought it was a brilliant chess match strategy there for the offensive decision makers and play designers there for the Kansas City Chiefs. Most impressive for me is Chris Jones. You talked about it was okay. It was George Karlaftis or Chris Jones. You went with Karlaftis. I'll go with Chris Jones here. 8 pressures, 26.1 pass rush win percentage. He just remains one of the most versatile and dominant defensive linemen that we have in the NFL. Most disappointing, I'll go with Kendrick Green. 10.9 pass blocking grade, 4 pressures allowed, 10.3 pressure percentage. So a little bit of here's a strength that I'm praising, but there's a reason why. It's because it's a most disappointing. And again, we go to the Texans offensive line, and it's something that has been a storyline for them the entire season. And I feel like they had a couple of weak links this week as well. Again, it's not really a great matchup because it's your weakness going up against one of their strongest strengths. But the offensive side of the football, no Stephon Diggs, no Tank Dell now. Man, I don't know if you saw this, but I looked at the over-under for Nico Collins for their game coming up, and 90.5 is the over-under. That's a lot of yards for an over-under for a wide receiver, but it's hard not to think that Nico Collins is going to hit that simply because the Texans need him to if they're going to keep winning football games and get on a hot streak before they get into the playoffs. So That's my most impressive and most disappointing there. For the other Saturday game, Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens. Ravens won this one at home 34-17, but man, it was a game where maybe even felt like it was further apart than what that final score showed. The Ravens in this one as the victor. Safety Kyle Hamilton at the very top of the list, a 90.0 PFF grade. He had an incredible week, and the way that they've been using him lately has just really been elevating, I think, the entire defense. Running back Derrick Henry with an 82.4 in this game. Wide receiver Zay Flowers an 81.6. Edge rusher Kyle Van Noy an 80.3. And defensive tackle Nnamdi Madubuike with a 77.7. Quarterback Lamar Jackson continuing his MVP caliber campaign, now making things real interesting coming down the stretch for that award. A 90.2 overall grade. On Pittsburgh side of things, edge rusher Alex Highsmith with a 76.7, guard Isaac Suomalo with a 75.5, wide receiver Calvin Austin, 73.6, trying to step up for George Pickens, missing yet another game. Center Zach Frazier, a 67.9, running back Jalen Warren, a 66.1, and then Russell Wilson with a 63.1 in this game. What was your stat that told the story here from this Saturday game?
So this is funny because I kind of had to switch this up during the process of making this, because originally I was going to go with something with the pass rush, the Ravens pass rush, and the fact that Russell Wilson had somewhere around a 32 passing grade under pressure. And then I go and watch all those reps. I think it was 15 or 17 reps or so. And because I wanted to know, okay, what did the Ravens do? What did they do up front? Did they mess around? Did they blitz more? And the answer was they didn't do anything. And then I'm watching more and more, and I'm like, they're just sending 4 guys and getting there. What's going on here? And then I look on the back end, and I go, oh, they're actually lights out in coverage today. And it was their best coverage game of the season. So my actual stat now, 81.5 coverage grade as a team. Best of the season. And I think what we're getting now is, there's been much made of the move of Kyle Hamilton back to free safety. And yes, that is one thing that improves, but what does it bring schematically, right? And I think what we have with Hamilton being able to play single high, because we've been talking about him for 2 years now, playing in the box, strong safety in the slot, that versatile piece. But earlier in the season, when I was looking at the Ravens and their defense and their coverages and everything like that, it didn't feel like they had an identity. They were kind of middle of the pack in every coverage. They didn't blitz a whole lot. We knew they were struggling in the passing game, but we didn't really know why. They were just giving up too many explosives. And moving Hamilton back to free safety now, what it's done is now they're leaning into being a more single high coverage team, right? Just 1 and 3. And I think Russell Wilson probably got some flashbacks to Seattle seeing that much cover 3 in this game before they moved Hamilton to free safety in week 11, all right? 26 in their rate of using single high coverages. That's up to 6 since week 11 because they moved Hamilton back and he can just rove back there. He's got the range to handle single high. And now you got Ardarius Washington in the box who's doing a good job as, the strong safety, that slot role that Hamilton was playing. So I think the difference in the usage of coverage and the effectiveness in coverage, especially with Hamilton roving back there, because you can't just take deep shots with Kyle Hamilton. He's got sideline to sideline range. Him embracing that role, them embracing a defense and a coverage set that really embraces his speed and his range back there, that's changed this whole operation on defense. And now they can still have 7 or 8 in the box when it comes to stopping the run. They were already really good at stopping the run, but sitting in single high this much helps your run game, and having a free safety like Hamilton, and that was supposed to be Marcus Williams, right? And he was kind of ineffective throughout the first half of the year. Been benched now it's Hamilton and Washington. I think it's also played a role in changing their scheme and their effectiveness in coverage, and they had their best day in coverage against Pittsburgh.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good call out. I mean, if I'll just link that to my most disappointing, I think it was just a total defensive dominant day for the Ravens, because you mentioned how well they're playing on the back end. I agree with you. They're playing aggressive. They're playing confident. And this is a team that really needed that. They have struggled a lot defending the deep ball. You mentioned, especially in the first half of the season, when just defending the deep ball, I believe they had a 77.4 coverage grade against the Steelers. And so, of course, no George Pickens in that one. We've talked about how the deep ball for Pittsburgh has been very different, very less efficient and less explosive with Pickens not in the lineup. But still, kudos to the Ravens and their coverage unit for really taking care of business. And then getting to my most disappointing was the Steelers' offensive line, because you mentioned Ravens didn't really blitz a ton. They didn't really get exotic with what they were doing. They just didn't play well up front. 4 sacks allowed, 13 pressures, 34.5 pressure percentage. Mason McCormick specifically, 2 sacks allowed, 5 pressures, 13.2 pressure percentage. I know Broderick Jones has struggled as well. So it was not a good day for the Steelers offensive line that really couldn't handle even just the front 4 of the Ravens. And anytime you're getting home with 4, anytime you're being effective with 4, well, then you're not going to use the coverage resources. You're not going to use the second level resources to attack the pocket because you don't have to. So that ended up being the most disappointing for me on the flip side of sort of what you were talking about there. The stat that told the story for me is Lamar Jackson's versatility, but not just in this game, but the entire season. I looked back at this whole year because there were so many different pass catchers, and it feels like he is, for a while we talked about like, all right, well, Lamar, he's a great dual threat. He's a good rushing threat. Now he's got Derrick Henry behind him, but it was like, oh, okay, before Zay Flowers, it was he just needs one great receiving option. Now he has Zay Flowers. And it's like, all right, well, now he needs kind of like one outside of Zay Flowers. And it was Mark Andrews for a little bit there. And then he went through kind of like an injury and a down spell. But Isaiah Likely has popped up a little bit. But we've always just thought that the Ravens passing attack was going to be mainly a complement of what the kind of rusher that Lamar Jackson is, but then he just needs like one other weapon, almost like what we think about the Philadelphia Eagles, right? Or maybe even the Pittsburgh Steelers. They want to be a team that runs the ball very well, has a little bit of dual threat action with their quarterback, especially when Justin Fields is their quarterback, and then they've got that deep threat option. They've got their go-to option with George Pickens. And I think some people looked at the Ravens sort of as the same way with that formula. But I looked this up this season. Lamar Jackson has a quarterback rating above 100 to 11 different pass catchers, running backs, tight ends, wide receivers. Like, it's not just he needs one option in the passing game and he's just going to go to that one person to really complement everything that they do. Lamar Jackson is elite right now, no matter who he throws the ball to. No matter if it's a running back coming out of the backfield, a tight end over the middle, wide receivers at all 3 levels of the field, he has an above 100 quarterback rating to 11 different pass catchers. To me, that's incredible. That's not just diversity and versatility. That's excellence at all of the different options that you have. And a guy like Todd Monken obviously is just sitting there licking his chops for everything that he's able to do when you have that kind of chemistry and success with the guys that you're throwing the ball to. So to me, it was another excellent step forward for Lamar Jackson to potentially winning a second MVP. We've talked about it before. I think this year is even better than what last year was from Lamar when he won MVP. Stiffer competition this year with what Josh Allen has been doing. But that versatility to me has just been incredible. My most impressive was just Kyle Hamilton. So before we get to yours, you already sort of mentioned in there, 60 total snaps for Kyle Hamilton, 90 overall grade, 2 solo stops in run defense, 2 receptions allowed, but only for 7 yards. He had a forced incompletion as well in this game, and you just talked about what a difference he makes being that free safety and how they have switched that up on the defensive side and how everybody seems to be playing more confidently because of it. So I'll turn it back over to you now. I feel like I've done enough talking on this one. You're most impressive and most disappointing.
No, I think you're right in that Lamar Jackson, it's also been his best season throwing from the pocket. And in the past, I think we've thought about him as, play action and rolling out and throwing to tight ends. But I'll tell you what, it does help to have that big monster next to you in the backfield to give you some balance. Derrick Henry, look, 24 carries, $162, 8 forced missed tackles, 7 explosive runs, also 2 more forced missed tackles as a receiver. The Baltimore Ravens are 8-0 when Derrick Henry runs for at least 90 yards. When they have balance with the way Lamar's throwing the football, their offense is unstoppable. We've seen it several times this year where they just walk on the field and their offense just kind of onslaughts their way to a win. And in this game, I think Henry being able to set the tone early, that's something he didn't get to do in this first matchup, right? I can remember, wasn't it the Ravens' very first drive in the first matchup that he fumbled and there wasn't really a whole lot of explosive running? The Ravens set the tone up front. Derrick Henry set the tone in the run game, and then it just set themselves up for success against the Steelers secondary that's really been struggling. So Henry's my most impressive. And then, going through that secondary for the Steelers, these cornerbacks, this is the clear weakness on this defense, right? They are now last in the league in overall and coverage grade, their cornerback room. 33.7 coverage grade in this game. They're dealing with injuries now. Joey Porter Jr. is hurt. Cam Sutton was struggling. Corey Trice, Beanie Bishop, you name it. I think the Steelers it's very, very clear that you can throw outside the numbers against this team. You can get yourself, and they play a lot of man coverage for some reason still, but you can get those single coverage matchups outside. We saw it last week with A.J. Brown. We saw it this week with Zay Flowers. It's really tough right now for as good as their pass rush is. I believe they're still first in pass rush grade. They're eighth in run defense grade, but the Steelers at cornerback, that's the kryptonite of this defense. If you can throw outside the numbers, you can have success against them, and Lamar did it in this game.
Giants and the Falcons, as we get into the Sunday slate of games here, the early afternoon games. Falcons won this game 34-7 in Michael Penix's first game here as a starter since making the switch from Kirk Cousins over to him. For Atlanta's side of things, their top-graded player was offensive tackle Jake Matthews, a 91.7, safety Jesse Bates, a 90.3, linebacker Caden Ellis, a 90.2. Whew! It's not often you get 3 90s on one team in one game. That's pretty impressive. Guard Chris Lindstrom with an 84.6. Guard Matthew Bergeron an 81.4. As you can notice, there's a little bit of a theme here, and that's the Falcons' offensive line kicked some serious ass in this game. Quarterback Michael Penix in his first start, a 75.4 overall grade. On New York's side of things, rookie wide receiver Malik Neighbors has the top grade at a 75.6. Linebacker Ty Summers with an equal 75.6 himself. Edge rusher Kayvon Thibodeau a 68.2. Cornerback Deontay Banks a 67.3. Guard Jake Kubas with a 67.2. And then Drew Lock in this one, not pretty. 38.6 overall grade here for Drew Lock. Your stat that told the story here, Dalton. What do we got?
So no matter what the result of this game was, we were going to come out of it talking about Michael Penix Jr. in his first start. So that's what I'm going to do. Look, I think if you just looked at the box score and went, okay, 18-27, 200 yards, the interception, you would just go, okay, he was whatever. They carried him to a win. I don't think that's the case at all. A 77.7 passing grade. I thought he was in command. I thought he had a really good knowledge of the offense. I think his eyes, he uses his eyes as a weapon. You can see multiple times looking off defenders, freezing defenders during his drop, and then getting back where he needs to be. You saw him get to his second read on a couple of play action looks. I think the fact that he is more mobile than Kirk Cousins, maybe that doesn't show up in rushing yards, but you could tell clearly that Zach Robinson was more comfortable calling the bootleg game off of the outside zone that they run, right? So I think it was just the foundations of their offense with Penix at quarterback looked a lot better. And I think one of the big things in this game that Penix did was really effective over the middle of the field. 8 for 8 with 99 yards and a 90 passing grade over the middle of the field. It's somewhere that, look, Cousins was in the middle of the road grading-wise over the middle, but he came into this week leading the league in interceptions over the middle third of the field. Stroud passed him up in that Chiefs game with 2 over the middle himself, but it's just something that there was certain throws in this offense that it felt like we just weren't getting to with Cousins. And even the willingness to be able to throw on first down, to go to the bootlegs, to just go to some of the things that Cousins either physically or just, he just couldn't make the throws, right? And it's been a struggle, I think. To me, this offense has looked a little bit handcuffed all year. This was a game with Penix in there, even though he's a rookie in his first start. It didn't look handcuffed. They didn't look afraid to call anything. He can throw over the middle. He can throw outside the numbers. There was a couple of terrific intermediate out routes he threw. And I going back and watching all the dropbacks, I don't think he made a single bad read or a mental mistake all day. And I know, look, he's playing the Giants. I get it. But I think he's got a pretty good matchup next week going into Washington. And I think he could make a lot of similar throws next week against that defense. So I think it was a really good day for Penix, even though the traditional numbers don't look so big, right? And people think about, he could have torn up the Giants. Well, he did what he needed to do to win. Obviously, the defense made a couple of big plays. But I thought Penix was fantastic in his first start.
Yeah, middle of the field is what I was going to point out, because there were a lot of things that I feel like he did well, but specifically the stark contrast of how he was able to drive the football over the intermediate middle. I know you talked about just kind of in between the numbers over the middle of the field. He was 8 for 8. He was 4 for 4 in the 10 to 19 yards down the field. So that intermediate middle, which I think is so important because it's exactly where those linebackers and those safeties could threaten, that you have to have arm talent to hit. And Michael Penix has serious arm talent to be able to hit those throws. Kirk doesn't anymore, or at least he certainly did not this year. It felt like anytime Kirk Cousins was attacking over the middle of the field, it had to be with such high anticipation. And if it was a second off, like you mentioned, he had 0 big-time throws and 8 turnover-worthy plays in that intermediate middle part of the field, 10 to 19 yards down the field, right in between the numbers and the hash mark. So it's an area where, to me, that was the biggest difference in a positive manner of why you put Michael Penix into the game. And we got to see that from game one from him, which is great to see. Falcons pass rush, for me, continues to be the story. It was the story of this game. How well they were able to play. 3 sacks, 14 pressures, 53.7% pass rush win percentage as a team. Weeks 1 through 8, so the first half of the season, this team had 7 total sacks. Just since week 9, and we're not even done with the entire second half of the year, they already have 20. They're going to finish with triple the sacks that they had through the first half of the season in the second half of the season. So, Caden Ellis, Arnold Ebiketie, like Matthew Judon, these guys all got sacks this past week. They're just playing very well. They're blitzing a little bit more, but to me, they're blitzing a little bit more with their linebackers than they have been the defensive backs. It felt like throughout the early parts of the season, whether it's from the slot or just corner blitzes in general, it felt like they were kind of trying to get a little bit creative with how they were blitzing their defensive backs, and it wasn't really working for them. Now when they blitz, they're doing it more from their box defenders, and I feel like it's just helping overwhelm the offensive line, and they're able to get home a lot more. So one of the most struggling and least intimidating pass rushes on paper, now all of a sudden becoming pretty dang good down the stretch. And with Tampa's loss and the Falcons winning, now the Falcons have that tie for first place in the division. And so with 2 games left to go, they're actually, I think, going in the right direction to be able to hold on to this thing. We'll see. The Bucs no longer control their own destiny, but the Falcons do. So it'll really come down to the wire, as it feels like it has in the NFC South for a little bit now. Who's your most impressive and most disappointing?
I'm glad you mentioned that pass rush and that increased blitzing, because honestly, if you look, their highest graded pass rusher and their leader in pressures is actually a linebacker they signed in the offseason. That's Caden Ellis. 5 pressures on just 11 pass rush reps, a strip sack, and also the pressure on Drew Lock that forced the Jesse Bates pick 6. He threw it before he wanted to. He didn't see Bates coming in the zone. And Caden Ellis, he's just somebody who took this game over as a pass rusher, as a blitzer. Also 3 positive run defense grades with a stop. Leads him this year with 37 pressures and an 86.3 pass rush grade, despite only having the 8th most reps blitzing on the team, or pass rushing, I should say, as a team. He's been, despite getting Matt Judon and having Grady Jarrett and all the young kids on the defensive line, it's actually a linebacker, and he played that hybrid role for the Saints too. They used him off the edge a little bit like we've seen before with Zach Baun, right, who's now playing great with Philly. Caden Ellis really had a huge impact on this game, 92.6 pass rush grade in this game. He was fantastic, and I think they're only going to increase that blitz usage more because of him.
I'll go to Bijan Robinson for my most impressive. 103 all-purpose yards, so rushing and receiving, because he's not returning kicks. Over 1,500 all-purpose yards this season. Only Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry have more. So Bijan Robinson, for him getting drafted in the top 10 and number 8 overall, and you go, do you take a running back that high? He could not be a better return on investment for them, right? For making the pick, if you want to compare him to necessarily maybe other players, okay, you can get into that discussion if you want to, but for picking Bijan Robinson, couldn't have gone better. He could not be better for what you envisioned him to be worth in that number 8 overall pick. He is affecting the game at a very high level, rushing and receiving. He could be a go-to offensive weapon at all times for this team. And so just a shout out to Bijan Robinson and how well he's been able to play another game where he had over 100 all-purpose yards. Most disappointing for me, it's the obvious one, but we've talked about so many things that are disappointing about this Giants team. So I feel like no matter what, we're kind of being repetitive here. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to the passing game. This team sucks at passing the football. Doesn't really matter who their quarterback has been, whether it's been Daniel Jones or Drew Lock or Tommy DeVito, they can't pass the football. I know it's been frustrating for a lot of their players, receivers. We've heard the frustrations from Malik Neighbors throughout the season, but just from the coaches as well, and even guys who are struggling even at the quarterback position, knowing that they have to play better. But 22 for 39, we mentioned the 38 passing grade for Drew Lock there, just 210 passing yards in this game. And even with them starting the game out 7-0 with a passing touchdown to Tyrone Tracy in the back of the end zone, they could not sustain a passing attack that allowed them to stay competitive in this game. Atlanta scores 34 unanswered points after that, and the reason why is because they just don't have a consistent passing attack. So it's just still the most disappointing for me, because it's now there's now not even really an ability to evaluate a lot of players on this team, because the offensive output is as bad as it is and as inefficient as it is. So we're kind of we're on to next year, to modify the Bill Belichick quote. I mean, that's kind of where we're at with the New York Giants. And the only question that really remains is is Joe Shane and is Brian Daboll going to still have their headset and their front office chairs and their front office when next season begins? So that's what I have as most disappointing. But what do you have?
I've got the same thing. Pass protection, I know we've talked about it a lot, but Evan Neal at right tackle, another rough day for him. And only 2 pressures officially given up, but he had 7 other losses as a pass protector, 37.7 pass blocking grade. And watching the reps, honestly, and watching him kind of struggle to readjust his feet both to the speed rush and back to the inside move, I think the only thought that I have left with Neal 3 years into it, I think you kind of pull the Mekhi Becton here and maybe see if he can play guard next year. Just be like, okay, if we have one more year and we're going to give him another shot, I think you move him inside, you give him a whole offseason inside and see if he can play in there. I don't think he has the feet to play tackle at this level. It's just too hard for him with the athletes that there are out on the edge. And look, these aren't even the best edge rushers in the league you're going to face when you're playing the Atlanta Falcons. But I mentioned even Caden Ellis and the Falcons were even attacking him on stunts and things like that. It's just, I think Evan Neal, either, I don't know if his time is coming to an end in New York, but if it's not, or even if he goes to another team like Mekhi Becton did, I think you have to give him a shot at guard. I just don't know that he can play enough in space. Play well enough, I should say, in space to stay at tackle.
Lions-Bears. Next game that we're hitting here, Detroit wins this game 34-17. Top 5 graded Detroit Lions here in this one. Center Frank Ragnow at the very top of the list with an 87.1. Wide receiver Jameson Williams an 86.0, thanks to a bomb of a touchdown that really helped out his day. Linebacker Jack Gamble an 84.0, guard Kevin Zeitler an 80.0, excuse me, and then interior defender Levi Onwuzurike with a 76.2. Jared Goff in this one a 69.6. On Chicago side of things, wide receiver Keenan Allen an 83.2, offensive tackle Darnell Wright 72.8, cornerback Jalen Johnson is 66.4, linebacker TJ Edwards is 65.5, defensive tackle Byron Cowart with a 64.0, and then quarterback Caleb Williams, very solid, very respectable 83.0. Great in this one. Stat that told the story, Dalton. What do you got?
Yeah, I think the Bears, I mean, the grades look better, and they scored, what was it? Was it 20 points going, or 17 points the rest of the way, but they just can't get off the ground early in games. And you look at their first 4 drives, they ran exactly 15 plays, which gave me a good cutoff to go with the first 15 play stat, right? You talk about those scripted plays that are supposed to be the ones that work the best throughout the game, and then you make your adjustments. The Bears, they just can't get off the ground. You look at their first 15 plays in this game, 58 yards, the 4 drives, a punt, a fumble on a jet sweep to Rome Odunze, a Rome Odunze fumble after a catch, and then another punt, 48 offensive grade. And by the time those 15 plays got done, and then the Lions had their first 4 drives, the game was already 20-0 because the Lions are one of the best teams in football at scoring early in games. We know this, right? The Bears, they just spot teams too many leads, and they can't get off the ground offensively. And actually digging into this for the season, they're the lowest graded offense in the league on their first 15 plays of a game. So, I know the coaching staff obviously is in shambles with, firing this and that and interim and all of that, but it just continues to be the story. And Caleb puts up big numbers when they're already down, in big deficits, 20-0 in this game. And it's good for him, obviously, to get reps and get good reps no matter the situation, but they can't win ball games when you're falling behind. It's every week. It's 14-0. It's 20-0. It's just not being able to get going. You think about the 49ers game when, what was it, they had like 3 yards in the first half or whatever that was. I mean, they just cannot get off the ground early in these games to compete with teams like this, and that's all that happened again in this game.
For me, the stat that told the story is one that's been really surprising to me all year long. I understand that defense is a very up and down thing. We're seeing that with the Jets this year, for example. Just because you're a good one year does not mean that you're going to be good the next year. Obviously, if you retain players that are great, it gives you a good chance to do that. But defense, just more than offense, is so up and down. It's hard to be super consistent. But even with that being said, the Bears and how bad they've struggled in coverage this year have been it's been really concerning for me. This week, 37.2 coverage grade. That was last. Obviously, we have one game left to go, but right now that's dead last of any team in the NFL. 37.2 coverage grade as a team. 52.8 coverage grade over the last month. That's 25th in the NFL. And they are 31st in EPA per pass allowed over the last month. They have all of their scheduled starters outside of Jaquan Brisker. That's it. And I think Jaquan Brisker is obviously a good player. If he's out there, I think he's a difference maker. There's no doubt about it, especially because Jonathan Owens really struggled in this game. But you still have most of the rest of your secondary. Jaquan Brisker can't be worth this much, or if he is, he needs to get a pay raise because the wins above replacement for him has got to be a lot higher. And I understand that like the front needs to get better, and that really helps out the coverage, and they need to get a little bit more impact play up on the front. But some of those guys in the front have even been playing decent this season. It's been on the back end. How unreliable the Bears have been on the back end is just really concerning for me, especially when you go into next season and you say to yourself, well, all right, well, all we need is the right offensive mind. You know, a good offseason will change little things here and there, whatever. We've made a lot of our bets. This is sort of the team that we have. If we just change who's orchestrating the offense and really figuring things out, and if that's the case, then this offense will be humming. The defense is where it needs to be. This team's going to be able to compete even in a really, really, really competitive division. I don't know how much of a guarantee that is, the way that their defense, specifically their coverage unit, has played this year. And just like they can have a bad year out of nowhere, you can think that it's possible they have a bounce back next year because there's a lot of the same good players. But I don't know. I have many more worries for this coverage unit after watching them over the last month and the second half of the season than I thought I was going to have with them, even independent of how their offense struggles. To me, the stat that told the story is the Bears coverage unit once again failing to hold up their end of the bargain here. Even if I understand it's a great Lions offense, still, you kind of got your cards on the table for the defensive player that you have. You got to be able to play better than this. You can't just say to yourself, well, we played the Lions, so, it's just a guaranteed loss. That you can't be doing that. Certainly not in this division with how good it is.
Right, and I think it's a difference in coaching, too. You're talking about an established culture that Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson have on their offense, and just completely no culture that the Bears have on defense, considering, their defensive head coach was fired, and it's really, everything's kind of aimless. And I think the big thing to remember with this secondary is, other than Kevin Byard, they are a bunch of talented guys, right? Jalen Johnson, Tyreek Stevenson, Brisker, you mentioned, is hurt, Kyler Gordon, but they're also young guys, right? And young guys can be volatile too. And in times like this, maybe they get a little undisciplined. I think you see a lot of explosive plays because of a lack of discipline in zone coverage and things like that. So I think it can turn around. You're right. With the right defensive coaching and the right culture put in there, that defense can turn around. We saw it the second half of last year. They were really good. The first handful of weeks this year, they were really good. They were one of the best secondaries in football through the first 5-6 weeks. But when you have a lot of young players like that and then a lot of things go wrong, I think it's the same thing we've talked about with Caleb Williams in the offense, where it's like, okay, there's just no direction here, right? And we need the coaching staff. So I think the Bears and this hire, it's been talked about a lot, whatever coaching hires that they make this offseason, it's incredibly important considering all of the young guys on their team that they're trying to build around.
Man, you said other than Kevin Byard, and then said they've got a bunch of talented guys. So I was like, hold on, we're not slandering Kevin Byard over here. Wait a second.
I meant he's the only older guy of the bunch. Yeah. No, Kevin Byard is certainly talented. Trust me, I'll praise him all day long. He's I'll tell you what, maybe a borderline Hall of Famer one day. We'll see. But no, certainly you just have all those young guys that he's trying to lead. But he's also, Kevin Byard's not the head coach either, so it's kind of hard for him to do it without any structure around him.
Yeah, coaching. Paramount for this team. Paramount for this team moving forward. Imagine if they would have had Jim Harbaugh. Whew. Imagine. Most impressive, most disappointing. Who you got?
Kind of sticking with that theme. Look, that secondary, boy, they struggled to contain Jameson Williams. And if he's going to play like this down the stretch, maybe the Lions don't need any defense. 5 catches for 143 yards. 3 of those explosive plays. Career high 87.8 receiving grade. You saw the deep post that he hit. He was, there's a crossing route that he's shaking the entire team on. I think if we're going to start to see the full potential of Jameson Williams and why they drafted him, I believe it was 12th overall, right? You're talking about a dangerous team because that adds this vertical element that even Amon-Ra St. Brown doesn't add way downfield with speed of Williams. So he's an absolute burner. He had the best game of his career in this game. And on the other side of that, you mentioned the secondary, you mentioned Jonathan Owens. Just look, if you're a middle-of-the-field defender against the Lions and the Lions have a day like this, somebody's going to get torched. And he gave up 7 catches, 160 yards, was responsible for all 3 of Jared Goff's touchdowns, including the deep post to Williams, and then a play that you're about to get into to Sam Laporta. He was supposed to pick up Laporta, ended up not doing that. Laporta beat him down the sideline, and I just think that's what's going to happen. It's going to, a lot of times when the Lions score this many points, and they do it a lot, I'm going to find probably a linebacker or a safety who ends up getting torched on it, because that's who they attack, is those guys in the middle of the field.
Yeah, for most impressive, it could be a number of things. Obviously, just the Lions bounce back in general. Jahmyr Gibbs playing without David Montgomery and playing very well. It could be the offensive line. You mentioned Jameson Williams. It could be so many different players for the Lions, but we've praised so many of their players every single week throughout the season. I'll say my most impressive is instead going to Ben Johnson and the play design of that fake stumble touchdown to Sam Laporta, which is just like, man, they are toying with you if they are pulling that stuff out of the bag. And diabolical, honestly, for him to call that kind of a play in a divisional game, and with as much as this offense is humming, of course it worked, right? So that fake stumble play action to Sam Laporta, the guts, the gall, even the genius maybe to make that kind of a play call. It's just very impressive from Ben Johnson.
I think what's funny about it. I think there is no better quarterback to sell that with than Jared Goff.
Yeah, no, I know, because he's a little clumsy. He's a little clumsy, and like you would believe that he's about to fall. I don't know. Maybe the only other quarterback that I could, like, Will Levis maybe doing that, right? Because like Levis is sometimes the footwork's a little all over the place because he gets a little too hyped up. Like maybe Jameis Winston as well. But other than that, yeah, if you want somebody that you think is a little bit more reliable to be able to pull that off, I do agree with you. Jared Goff is a great candidate for that.
Absolutely. I mean, just, and what Ben Johnson comes up with, even up 20 in games like this, is just ridiculous. And it is the reason, in part, that you still have hope that, well, maybe the Lions could make a run, all the defensive injuries. But look, if they're just going to go putting up 34, 42, 45 points every week, then you still can't count them out, even against the Philadelphias and Minnesotas. And I'll tell you what, this Week 18 matchup with Minnesota is going to be an absolute burner, isn't it? Especially possibly the number 1 seed on the line with the Eagles losing this week.
They're going to make that Sunday Night Football, right?
Either that or Rams-Seahawks is still sitting there as possibly.
Oh, yeah, Rams-Seahawks
you
as well.
You could get the NFC West going on the line there. Either one of them.
It's going to be one of those two. Obviously, they have the flexibility to flex every single game in Week 18. If you guys go look up the Week 18 schedule, it all says to be determined for time. And even the date, right? Because they could go to the Saturday games as well. So they don't know the date, they don't know the time, but we will know that very soon after next week when we know exactly what these teams are going to be playing for in Week 18. My most disappointing is sort of the Bears just being winless during what has been a pretty nice Caleb Williams run here. Now, not to say that it's been perfect for him, but since Week 8, second half of the season, he's 15th in the NFL, so right around the middle of the pack when it comes to big-time throws. And he is 7th in the NFL in turnover-worthy plays. And I mean that in a good way, not most turnover-worthy plays. I mean, he is 7th in the NFL, is saying the 7th least amount of turnover-worthy play percentages that we have in the league. So Caleb's been getting better, and he had a couple of really nice throws this past week as well. It's sort of a shame that there's nowhere along the line that he has been able to say, like, hey, yeah, I played a great game and we won as a team. Because what are they, 0-9 now in their last 9 games? So it's such a brutal stretch where even a little bit of good play from him is not being rewarded at all because they've got a brutal schedule. Obviously, we've talked about how the defense has been struggling a little bit there. But to me, the most disappointing thing is just Caleb, again, not even getting like 1 or 2 wins in here from playing a little bit better. It's just a disappointing part of having a brutal schedule down the stretch. Cleveland Browns at the Cincinnati Bengals. Bengals won this game 24-6. Top 5 graded players for Cincinnati. Jamar Chase at the very top of the list with an 88.7. Edge rusher Trey Hendrickson with a 79.7. Cornerback Mike Hilton, a 76.0. Wide receiver Andre Yoshivas with a 75.9. Wide receiver T. Higgins with a 75.0. Look at that, all 3 wide receivers getting in there in the top 5. Joe Burrow in this one, a 75.8. On Cleveland's side of things, Myles Garrett with an 87.3. Guard Wyatt Teller, an 81.0. Center Ethan Posick with an 80.4. Defensive tackle Michael Hall Jr. an 80.1. And then defensive tackle Sam Kamara with a 76.7. Dorian Thompson-Robinson starting in place of Jameis Winston. I'll get to this in a second. I don't know how much of this was just a clear benching from Jameis, which he was benched last week, so maybe that was the way that it was going to go, or Jameis Winston having a little bit of a shoulder injury here. But either way, DTR a 54.1. overall grade. What's your stat that told the story here?
Look, as always, everything centers around Joe Burrow because that's how the Cincinnati Bengals work, right? And I think the fact that, against still a pass rush like this with Myles Garrett, that's very dangerous. Burrow's ability, like I mentioned before with Mahomes, Burrow's ability to protect himself and create clean pockets because he's getting rid of the ball so quickly. That's his best asset. And I know the memorable play coming out of this game is the one where he's rolling and falling. He trips on somebody's foot and falls over and throws a touchdown anyway. I know that's the most memorable play. But consistently throughout this game, you talk about Joe Burrow in a clean pocket, 18 to 21, 206 yards, 2 big-time throws, 83.2 passing grade, and an average time to throw when the pocket is clean of 2.05 seconds. That tells me he's protecting himself because he knows his offensive line playing with some backups up there and having to block Myles Garrett and even Isaiah McGuire off the other edge in a tough pass rush. Got to protect himself, and he's better at it than almost anybody. 92.6 clean pocket grade this season, second in the NFL behind Lamar Jackson. I mean, there's only so many ways we can paint the fact that Joe Burrow's an elite football player. He's an elite quarterback. He's one of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in this league. But I think in moments like this, he's learned so well, especially early in his career. We saw it even in the Super Bowl run. The ability for him to process at such a fast rate and see defenses and know where he wants to go both pre and post snap, it shows up in a game like this. And that's why the Bengals made this look really, really easy because they know when you have Joe Burrow, you're just at a decided advantage in most of the games you're playing in, and it's the fact that he can process defenses that quickly.
My side that told the story is that Cleveland was never going to win this football game. They were never going to win it, and it's because of their passing game.
You're killing Tyler back there right now, by the way. You just killed him.
Well, I'm sorry. They had no chance in this football game. And it's crazy that we're still just talking about the same things, even with Deshaun Watson out of the game. But 125 total passing yards in this one, 3.2 yards per passing attempt, 51.5 passing grade for DTR, and an average after target of 5.2. I mean, it's just, again, you're not going to win football games in the NFL if that's your passing output. You're just not going to do it. I suppose we're going to get to the Colts game in a little bit, and so the Colts did win. So maybe I can't say that you would never have a chance in this game, but certainly on the road against the Cincinnati Bengals, terrible script. I mean, it was never going to work out for Cleveland given the way that they passed the football. The only chance of that, and that sort of gets me into my most disappointing, if the Browns benched Jameis independent of his shoulder injury, what are you doing? Do you just want the better draft pick? Because just tell me that you want the better draft pick because I'm okay with that. Don't tell me it's because you actually want to win football games because there's no way the DTR was going to do enough for you to win this football game in Cincinnati against Joe Burrow. It was not going to happen. It just was not going to happen. Jameis, for as much as you live by the sword, die by the sword, you can still live by the sword. You still have the live option. It's not just the die option. I don't think that DTR gives you the live option. You just slowly die, and maybe you think that that's like easier to handle. I don't know. So again, I heard and read that it was a shoulder injury and everything, and maybe it is just the fact that Jameis's shoulder was more hurt than we thought it was. But Jameis gets pulled out after last game, and DTR goes in there anyway. So if they were just saying like, nope, it's time to put DTR in, you're just going for the draft pick. That's what you're telling me. Because the stat that told the story is you were never going to be competitive in this game because you didn't have a passing attack to be able to do it. Jameis at least gives you that chance. DTR does not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'll tell you, there are games where you can watch, even at the NFL level, where you go, who's their quarterback and who's their quarterback? And, okay, that's who we're picking to win the game. It really is that simple. Now, with Jameis, against this defense, it might have been more interesting. Maybe not. Maybe Joe Burrow was just going to have another game the way he's had. But I'll tell you what, he can keep having these games when he's got Jamar Chase on the outside, too. I'll take that as my most impressive. Another 6 catches, 97 yards, a touchdown, 3 forced missed tackles, 86 receiving grade. I feel like I have to say this almost casually with Jamar because that's just the type of year he's having. And if we weren't getting freak years from a couple of these running backs, especially Saquon Barkley, we would probably get Jamar Chase in the conversation for Offensive Player of the Year as well as Joe Burrow possibly in the MVP conversation. And maybe if they make the playoffs, could still get there. But, I mean, look, Jamar, he's unstoppable. There's a reason he's leading in all 3 categories of the Triple Crown right now. He's just one of the best receivers in football, and I'll skip to most disappointing. On the other side, just tearing apart a Browns secondary that struggled all year. Every Browns starter in the secondary except for Grant Delpit had under a 60 coverage grade. No forced incompletions. Allowed 12 of 15 targets to be caught in man coverage for 145 yards and 3 touchdowns. Another team that has a struggling secondary that still runs a ton of man coverage, even though they're not very good at it. 4th worst coverage grade as a team in the NFL this season. The Browns, You mentioned it. You mentioned it before with the Bears, where, look, we know they have offensive issues, but the back end of this defense has not played well all season, and they need to get better in the secondaries, especially if you're going to be in a division with Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow. You have to be able to cover.
My most impressive, I'm going to go to Cincinnati side of things, as you would expect. I'm going to talk about slot corner Mike Hilton. 92.0 run defense grade is what I want to point out here for Mike Hilton. 2 tackles for loss on the blitz. He gave up 4 receptions on 4 targets, but just 21 yards. He also had 3 solo stops in coverage. And so, to me, he was all over the place. I thought he was playing with high energy. I thought he was playing with high IQ. Anytime that he attacked the pocket, whether it was in run defense being a little bit more aggressive or just off the blitz, I thought he was very effective. So Hilton has been one of the top slot corners in the game. Now, as he's getting a little bit older, he's not as good in coverage, but he's still fantastic, willing to be physical, and has such a smart IQ around the line of scrimmage. And I think that we saw that on display this past week, and that's why you get an elite run defense grade because of it. So Mike Hilton standing out. We saw his name in the top 5 grades, so I wanted to shout out Mike Hilton there. Before we get down to our next game, New year, it's a great time to reevaluate the financial goals, not just for yourself, but for your kids as well. Now is the perfect time to make sure that your kids are on a path towards a solid financial future. A kid's investment account for Fabric by Gerber Life is quick, it's simple to set up, lets you invest in their future now for education, big milestones, all different kinds of stuff. Fabric by Gerber Life, it was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kid's investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. The whole thing is online. It's very easy to set up an account. Could take as little as 5 minutes. Then you can manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. Funds can be used for nearly anything, be tuition, after-school activities, books, music classes. But then when they're adults, you keep the account. You can use things for, first car, starting a business, first house, anything like that. Anytime you have these investments, they can be really beneficial no matter what you are using them for. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family and start investing in your child's future today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. It's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL, meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. These portfolios are managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Incorporated. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. You can learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, I talked about how the Browns didn't really have a chance against the Bengals, given their passing game plan and their potential passing output. I said that no team was ever going to have that type of success. The Colts kind of did. When you look at how well they rushed the football, we're going to break this down a little bit further in a second, but Indianapolis hangs on to beat the Tennessee Titans by a final score of 38-30. I think a lot more high scoring than people thought that it was going to be. But on Indianapolis' side of things, their offensive tackle, Bernard Ryman, was a top-graded player with a 91.3. Guard Quentin Nelson, an 85.5. Defensive tackle Grover Stewart with a 78.1. Running back Jonathan Taylor, 78.0. And then wide receiver Josh Downs, a 74.5. Anthony Richardson in this one, a 63.0 overall grade. On Tennessee's side, safety Amani Hooker at the top of their list with an 89.0. Tight end Chigga with a 79.9. Wide receiver Calvin Ridley, a 76.7. Edge rusher Harold Landry III, a 75.1. Defensive tackle Jeffrey Simmons, a 74.0. And then Mason Rudolph in this one. Man, thanks to some heroic, felt like, last couple of drives there to make this one close. 70.0 overall grade. Stat that told the story, Dalton. What do we got?
All right, so I have to give it away now. This was my whiteboard game that I was sitting around drawing everything and all the schemes up here because okay, so obviously the Colts ran the living hell out of the football. They ran for 335 yards. That's the most by any team this season. But the number that got me more, that starts this story, 173 yards before contact, okay? And maybe some people are going, well, how come Jonathan Taylor didn't have a 97 rushing grade because he ran for all these yards, right? Offensive line, that's immediate. When you have a high yards before contact number, it immediately is, okay, what did the offensive line do right? Were they just killing people up front? Was it the schemes, a combination of both? In this game, it was all of it. You saw the top 2 guys there with Ryman and Nelson. I'll get into them in a minute. But what makes the Colts run game unique, all right, they run the most power schemes out of any team in the league, all right? And they're pulling people all over the place, and they found every which way to do it in this game. So I had to break it down between, you're talking powers and counters and, pulling front side guards into pin pull and things like that. 20 out of their, I believe it was 50 carries, all right, in this game. They had a puller coming from somewhere. And it could be a guard, tackle, center, anywhere. They had a puller coming from somewhere. Those 20 carries, Trev, 242 yards and 4 touchdowns. And there's the 92-point rushing grade on those plays. What they did in this game, because obviously the biggest problem when you're playing the Titans defense is Simmons and Sweat in the middle, right? And Sebastian Joseph Day, he's been having a good year on the inside. So you're not just going to line up inside zone and run between the tackles into the A and B gaps against Tennessee. That's just not how it works. They got a really good set of defensive tackles. It's the best part of their team. What they did through formations and through all of the pulling and all their power schemes and different things was create that leverage through angles, and the easiest blocks for especially a Colts offensive line playing some young guys that has had some injury, especially on the right side. The easiest blocks for an offensive lineman is a down block. You either take your guy in the inside gap, and if there's no one in that inside gap, just get to the second level and go, okay? That's what the Colts did. They took Simmons and Sweat out of it because they walled them off, and they created all those numbers, and they got blockers to the second level, especially I'll get into the Titans linebackers too because you had some young kids struggling with these schemes. That combination of things and the way that they decided to avoid Simmons and Sweat in this game wasn't necessarily to run outside, because sometimes, people would think, let's run toss sweep, let's run screens, let's be a perimeter team today. No, we don't have to do that. We just have to do it in a different way and create numbers. The way that the Colts use just a diversity, just a complete, just empty. Shane Steichen emptied the bucket with his run schemes in this game, with power, with pulling tackles, with, even Anthony Richardson on his design runs, and we're pin pulling with him and sending Taylor the other way so nobody knows which way the ball is going. An incredible job of scheming around some really good defensive tackles by Shane Steichen. And again, when you're talking about, 12 yards per carry, when the Colts pulled somebody to the other side of the line of scrimmage or even on the same side and pin pull and things like that. Just crazy. So the 4 plays that I do have written down are these 4 touchdowns that they scored on these plays.
Beautiful. I mean, it's just, and when you love acquiring talent either in free agency or the draft that allows you to have this sort of dominance in one. Now, you don't want to be obviously too one-dimensional with it, right? You don't want to get players who are incapable of zone blocking or doing the outside zone or the toss sweeps and things like that. You've got to get players who can be capable of it, but you do want to have an identity, right? We talked about that even earlier on this show. Some teams that have an identity and some that don't. And for the Colts, being a power rushing team and having that identity and having a running back, honestly, in Jonathan Taylor that really knows how to run behind this kind of a blocking scheme is perfect for them. And it was just a home run of an offensive strategy and execution by the Colts and what they were able to do in the run game. I mean, the stat that told the story for me, it's the same thing. It has to be the Colts' run success. So you were obviously able to break it down in even more detail. Taylor just overall 218 rushing yards on 29 carries. Richardson as well had 70 carries on 70 yards, on 9 carries. You mentioned the 335 rushing yards as a team. 162 of those came after contact, but you talked about how many of them came before contact as well. 0.209 EPA per rush. That was the 4th best rushing attack that they had in terms of EPA per rush so far this season. And so that was really the dominance, because Anthony Richardson barely passed the ball in this game. They were just so good on the ground and exactly what they wanted to do. It felt like they imposed their will on a defensive line where I wasn't sure if they were going to be able to do that, to be honest with you. Most impressive for me outside of what the Colts did in the rushing game is Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. 9 touchdowns since week 5. Only Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Terry McLaurin have more. He is just kind of quarterback proof, right? And I mean that not just between Mason Rudolph and Will Levis, but also when those guys are playing well and when they are not. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine seems to be getting in the end zone, and they seem to be big fans of his in the red zone and putting up 6 points. So he is my most impressive there. My most disappointing here in this one, I know you're going to talk about the Titans linebackers, who I thought struggled quite a bit, which I think is worth pointing out. But just overall, I think the Colts' 4th quarter defense was disappointing for me because it was such a great start for this group. First 2 quarters of the game, I thought they played really well. 0.567 EPA per play in the 4th quarter from the Colts was the 5th worst of any team in any quarter this week. Ironically, two of the teams that were worse than them, two of the four quarters that were worse than them, were owned by the Tennessee Titans in the second and third quarter because of how easy they made it for the Colts to run all over them. But just overall, Colts in the fourth quarter, a 50.1 defensive grade, and it just shows how up and down this Colts defense is, not just week to week, but even within games as well. So would have liked to see them finish this out a little bit stronger on the defense side of the football, and so that's where I was a little disappointed because I felt like this should have been a runaway, no doubt about it type of a Colts win. And they just didn't quite get that because of the fact the Titans scored 3 touchdowns on 3 of their last 4 drives there. So just that fourth quarter defense, I was a little disappointed. But what about you? Impressive. I know you talked about the offensive line, but disappointing here in this one.
The impressive, I just want to dig into on that left side with those top 2 guys we saw in the grading with Bernhard Raimann and Quentin Nelson. I mean, Raimann with a 90.5 run blocking grade, Nelson with an 81.5. Both of them, Trevor, with 11 positively graded run blocks, which is ridiculous. It's ridiculous for one of them because we see a handful of games or maybe once or twice a week where this happens. But to have 2 guys on the same side of the offensive line do it, between Nelson pulling all over the place, and if there's any guy I don't want running at me full speed in the NFL, it's Quentin Nelson for sure. And then Bernhard Raimann is so smooth, man. I mean, his footwork, his ability to get to the second level, just fantastic. This is them along with Philadelphia. Those are 2. I don't think I can name a better left side of an offensive line than these 2 guys. Bernhard Raimann, 4th highest graded left tackle in the league this season, and Quentin Nelson, the highest graded left guard. Look, I think if they're going to stay in this playoff race, and the Broncos loss obviously really hurt their chances, but you keep riding behind this offensive line and the left side of this offensive line. Now on the other side, you mentioned, I was talking about the Titans linebackers. I think more so than disappointing, it's just a really tough matchup for a lot of young guys playing. We know Jack Gibbons is out for the season, but Kenneth Murray struggled with a 26.9 run defense grade. James Williams, who's a rookie converted safety from Miami, he really struggled. Cedric Gray, a rookie from North Carolina, struggled. It was just the way this Colts offensive line was getting and scheming their way up to the second level. These linebackers must have been spinning. They must have been in the ice bath after the game extra long because it was really, really tough for a bunch of young kids to go against an offensive line like this and a play caller the way Shane Steichen was calling plays. Just an incredible job by him and this offensive line at dominating this game.
Most disappointing. Who you got before you get out of here?
Just that linebacker group. It's a tough day, a tough matchup going into it that got even tougher as it went on.
Rams and Jets. Rams win this game 19-9. I'm ready for the Jets season to be over. I know that you're ready for the Jets season to be over. I'm very ready for the Jets.
It's been over.
I know that it's been over in terms of actual competence for the Jets, but I feel like we're just every week after the game we're getting something in the post-game press conference that's a new storyline thing that we're talking about for the Jets and not the actual game. I know the week before they played well, but this week, Aaron Rodgers saying oh, we're going to find out who wants to be here next year and who doesn't. As if we weren't doing that the couple of weeks leading up to this. Garrett Wilson, I don't know, basically just airing out some of his frustrations with how it feels like he's not an emphasis in the passing game anymore. So it's just not great vibes, and I'm sort of ready for it to be over. I'm sort of ready to stop talking about it. But here we are talking about this game here for the Jets. They lose by 10 points. The top 5 graded players, let's do top 5s first before we dig into it. Well, Eric Jackson's very top for the Rams, an 86.3. Wide receiver Puka Nacua, an 83.8. Running back Kyron Williams, an 82.8. Edge rusher Jared Verse, a 77.7. Guard Kevin Dotson, a 77.5. And then Matthew Stafford, a 61.8. On the Jets side of things, center Joe Tippmann, an 84.2. Guard Elijah Vera Tucker, a 78.1. Wide receiver Devontae Adams, a 71.8. Offensive tackle Morgan Moses, a 67.9, and then cornerback DJ Reed, a 67.1. Aaron Rodgers in this game, 53.2 overall grade. What was your stat that told the story?
So it's really, to me, about the Jets on fourth down because their play on fourth down kind of tells the story in a microcosm of this game. They were 2 for 5 on fourth down, first of all. The 2 drives where they converted a fourth down, they scored. They scored their 9 points, right? The other 3, they obviously turned the ball over on downs, and that led to 13 Rams points that made the difference in the game. The only other time, you had the touchdown where Rodgers had the strip sack and all of that. But, also a field goal at the end that was missed that could have got them back into it when they were down 10. It's just, I mean, the Jets, look, they're going for it now. Last week they were slinging it around with Rodgers. That's what they're pretty much doing. They pretty much abandoned the run game in this one. I'll get to that in a minute. But they're going for it. They're going for it on fourth down. When it worked, it worked. When it didn't, that's when the Rams took advantage. And the Rams escaped on the road in the cold weather with a win that's probably even tighter than the score would tell you, 19-9. There was at one point this game was tied. The Jets, I believe, were leading at halftime of this game, if I remember right. This is where the Jets are at. They're going to go for it on fourth down, and they're going to try to let Rodgers win the game. And in this one, he just couldn't do it enough, especially in the second half.
Jets fumbles, obviously, are, to me, the stat that told the story here because they have 2 fumbles in this game. Both of them lost. Rodgers sack fumble in the third quarter. It's a 9-9 game. So it's tied at this point. What was it? 2 plays later, 3 plays later, Rams go in and score a touchdown. So then they go up by a touchdown. And then obviously you have Gibson's fumbling the punt with, okay, yeah, it's a 10-point game. There's only a minute 40 left. Would have sort of taken a prayer for the Jets to win that game or tie that game anyways. But to fumble the ball the way that they did there with the punt and then, the one before with Rodgers, it's a microcosm of their season. So to me, though, it's as simple as that. Those are the stats that told the story. You had a tie game and it's a sack fumble. Boom. All right. Now the Rams immediately score because they got the ball at their 21-yard line. And then any chance you would have had at a comeback at all whatsoever, you fumble the punt. The other team gets it. Game's over. Season's over. There it is. Most impressive for me is Kyren Williams. I keep talking about this all the time. We love to talk about Matthew Stafford, love to talk about Puka Nacua, love to talk about Cooper Kupp, obviously important players for the Rams. It all runs through Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams, I'm not going to say that he's more valuable than Matthew Stafford. I'm not going to sit here and say that. But to me, he is the engine. He is the centerpiece of how they want their offense to go. 84.1 rushing grade in this one, another 122 rushing yards, 82 rushing yards after contact. Had 9 of their 10 first downs in the game. Kyren Williams did on the ground. If that is not evidence enough to the fact that this dude is the cornerstone of how they run their offense, I don't know what else to tell you. So another fantastic day from Kyren Williams. And honestly, anytime that he is rushing for over 100 yards and his rush grade's above 80, I'm pretty much going to tell you the Rams are winning the football game because it's really hard to imagine that they're not, because of how efficient that offense could run. So he's the most impressive to me. What about you? Most impressive or most disappointing? I'll let you go wherever you want.
I'll go most impressive here, and you mentioned it, right? Sean McVay's offense has always been humming at its best when it has balance, and I'll tell you what, Kyren Williams was great, but his offensive line was great in front of him, too. I want to highlight that left tackle, Alaric Jackson, because he's really coming on lately, last several weeks. 90.6 run blocking grade in this game with 9 positive run blocks, and I think, to me, he just looks calmer than he used to. Now it feels like he's gotten comfortable. His footwork, his ability to get to the spot where he needs to get no matter what scheme they're running. I think Alaric Jackson's really improving. And since week 11, 86.6 overall and 88.3 run blocking grade. There's a lot going right now on this Rams offensive line that we didn't see earlier in the year. It's something I've talked about every single week, I'm pretty sure. But Jackson getting a lot better. Steve Avila getting healthy and going back to left guard. Rob Havenstein has been really good at right tackle. Kevin Dodson's an absolute monster. And Bo Limmer, the rookie at center, he's held his own all year. Honestly, he's a rookie who wasn't supposed to play, but Alaric Jackson at left tackle all of a sudden the last 6 weeks is playing at a superstar level, especially in the run game. So he's opening really good holes for Kyren Williams up there, and Williams has got to be feeling thankful that those 5 guys are blocking the way they are. If this offensive line plays like this, they can, in a one-game scenario, they can win this division, and B, they could beat anybody, because I think they're getting better as the year goes on, and they're getting hot at the right time. And then on the other side, I'm going to point to the Jets running backs, because a funny thing to me, with it being so cold and so windy, and even Aaron Rodgers was getting questioned about such a pass-heavy game plan, you would think, okay, the team that can actually run the football more effectively is going to win, and that's what the Rams did. But on the Jets side, they actually had their highest run blocking grade of the season. This wasn't about their offensive line not blocking people. Their running backs, 19 carries, 69 yards, 1 forced missed tackle. The Jets did not have an explosive run in this game. And a 53.7 rushing grade. They're kind of just not making anything happen. And they're 24th as a team this year in rushing grade. I mean, this is just where we're at between whether it's Breece Hall or Braylon Allen or Isaiah Davis. They're just not making it happen. And the decline of Breece Hall needs to be studied from what we saw last year when he was, second in the league in yards from scrimmage. I mean, their offensive, it's still the weirdest part run and pass game about this Jets team is that They actually did fix the offensive line, which was their biggest problem last year, I think even more than quarterback. And now the offense still isn't effective, even with a good offensive line. So I think as far as the run game goes, I don't believe Hall is injured by any means. They're just not getting it done, and that's kind of been the case. And in this game, that was the case. Both teams blocked well, but the Jets, they just didn't run it well.
I'll go to the other side, and you talk about things that need to be studied or addressed this offseason. The Jets' run defense grades are bad this season. I mean, they're not the same at defending the run that they have been over the last couple of years.
That's an easier one for sure.
Well, I'll let you go off in a second of exactly why you think that it is, but obviously there's players who are not in there that have been on the team before that they prioritize over others. They've got a handful of free agents this upcoming year, so I think the defensive line could look a lot different for this team. But 56.4 run defense grade this season, that's 27th in the NFL. They've gone backwards in their run defense grade each of the last 3 seasons. I believe 2 years ago, their run defense grade was a 77.4. Last year, it was like a 68.9. Now it's dramatically much worse at a 56.4. So they cannot defend the run as a team. And you've pointed this out throughout the season, where there's sort of been solid scheme and how he has had these players lined up, or some of the players that are no longer there who were previously on the team over the last couple of seasons. But before we move on, I'll throw to you, because I just think the Jets' run defense has been disappointing, not just in this game, but all season long. So as much as I'm praising Kyren Williams and you're praising the Rams' offensive line, the Jets' defensive line didn't really put up as much of a fight as they should have here in run defense. So you tell me what needs to change for this Jets run defense, and what's the culprit here?
No, I think outside of Quinnen Williams and Will McDonald, who is not a great run defender, he's more of a pass rusher, we know, and Jermaine Johnson will be back next year. Is obviously a big loss. It's a bunch of subpar run defenders on their defensive line. I mean, Solomon Thomas.
Former first round.
I mean, it's Solomon Thomas, Javon Kinlaw, Michael Clemens. They're playing young, undrafted kids, even like a Leonard Taylor, who maybe is playing a significant amount before he should. They just tore Hassan Reddick, I think, had a run D grade around 40 in this game, or maybe even in the high 30s. They just don't have any plus run defenders, and Quinnen Williams can't do it by himself. They tore apart this defensive line, and then when Jermaine Johnson tore his Achilles in week 1, it just killed the whole thing, because he might have, off the edge, he was by far their best run defender. I think that's just what you have is, other than Quinnen and McDonald and hopefully getting Johnson back 100% off the Achilles, I think you reset this entire defensive line, because it's from start to finish, from that very first game against the Niners, it's played at a subpar level in run defense.
Eagles and Commanders looked like the Eagles were going to kind of cruise to a victory in the first half of this game. And Jaden Daniels, once again, says a little bit of a not so fast, my friend. I remember saying this last week for the preview show. We haven't really had a heroic Jaden Daniels moment since probably the first 5 weeks of the season. Not that he hasn't given us some good games since then, but we didn't really have that heroic moment. And I said, against the Eagles, hosting the Eagles, a huge game here, would love to see another big-time moment from Jaden Daniels. And, oh, buddy, did that come true in this one. Commanders win the game 36-33. I tweeted this out afterwards. There is no feeling like making a major investment in a draft pick for a franchise quarterback and knowing that you just absolutely nailed it. And the Commanders have to feel like they absolutely nailed it. But it's more than just Jaden Daniels. We'll talk about him and other things. Let's talk about the top 5 graded players for Washington in this one. Edge rusher Cleveland Farrell at the very top of the list. Yeah, you're reading it right, a 90.9. Linebacker Bobby Wagner. What year is it? 90.8. At number 2 on this list, linebacker Frankie Louvu right behind him with a 79.5. Wide receiver Olamide Zaccheaus with a 74.9. And then offensive tackle Brandon Coleman, a 72.1. Jaden Daniels in this game, 74.8. Obviously had the crazy heroic plays in this one, but he did have a couple of turnover-worthy plays. We'll get to that in a second. Offensive tackle Jordan Mailata for the Philadelphia Eagles. An elite 92.2 overall grade. Quarterback Darius Slay, an 87.0. Edge rusher Josh Sweat, an 80.6. Linebacker Nakobe Dean, an 80.5, and then edge rusher Nolan Smith, a 77.1. Jalen Hurts goes out of this game with a concussion pretty early. Kenny Pickett comes in. Pickett, a 57.7 overall grade here in this one. Both of our stat that told the stories kind of have to do with Jaden Daniels, so I'll let you go first. Let's talk about Jaden here as the winner, the thrilling winner of this divisional game.
I think, look, you and I, I'm sure, with 5 minutes left in this game and we didn't watch together this week, we were sitting here going, man, the stat's going to be all the mistakes the Commanders made, right? 5 turnovers and a million penalties, 3 DPIs on Marshawn Lattimore, everything that went wrong, even though Kenny Pickett played most of the game, and then Daniels just had to go and be the hero and change up our whole script here. But I mean, look, this last drive, 4 for 5, 33 yards with the game-winning touchdown, 2 carries for 14 yards. It's the combination of talent, of the football IQ, the way he makes his reads. He doesn't just go out there and playground everything, right? He makes his reads. He makes throws within the pocket when he needs to scramble, like the big 4th and 11. I think it was early in the fourth quarter that he needed to keep them in the game. And I think in the clutch, you mentioned it, maybe outside of the Hail Mary, we hadn't seen a ton of heroic moments, but he's been consistently really good in the fourth quarters of games. One of the more clutch quarterbacks in football, but he goes about it so casually that maybe we don't think about it so much. Think of it this way, Trevor. 33 quarterbacks have thrown at least 70 passes in the fourth quarter of games this season. Jaden Daniels has the 3rd highest passing grade behind Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow. He just...
Not bad.
You can't...
Not bad.
Even with all of the mistakes and the fumbles and the issues in coverage and the penalties and everything, his resilience, and really not just resilience, very quiet, calm, and cool resilience. He feels like when the football's in his hands, he's going to do what he needs to do to win the ball game, right? Whether it's a Hail Mary, whether he's running the ball, whether he's throwing it down the seam with 10 seconds to go in this game, he's just got that quiet swagger about him and so much talent, so much football IQ. I think this win probably sealed up Rookie of the Year for him, I would assume. I know there's been some arguments. Bo Nix, maybe Brock Bowers probably has the next best case, but I assume the tiny bit of quarterback bias there is going to get it to Daniels. I might put Bowers second at this point, but we'll get to that later. Daniels is only so much. He is the best player on this team. He's not only the Rookie of the Year, he is their most valuable player. He is, if you're pointing to one singular reason that they're one win away from the playoffs, it's Jaden Daniels, and he showed it in the biggest way in this game at the end.
He's so much fun. He is so much fun watching him play. 5 touchdowns, 2 interceptions in this one. You mentioned some of the penalties. 3 big-time throws, 2 turnover-worthy plays. And so, people look at Daniels and they'll see the heroics and they'll see the PFF grade and they'll be like, what gives? Like, why is, he lower on the list when it comes to, PFF grades? Well, that's ultimately why. It's those 2 turnover-worthy plays. And even though it's the 5 touchdowns, it's only the 3 big-time throws there. But I will say something that is of note, just to, add a little bit onto what you were saying there. 2 of his 3 big-time throws, go back to his LSU tape, right? A lot of his biggest plays were those slot fades, right? It was sort of those like corner routes or just those veered vertical routes coming from the slot with a lot of space, veering towards the sideline. And it was Brian Thomas Jr., it was Malik Neighbors on the receiving end of it. And that's just, it is the route that allowed Jaden Daniels to showcase his talents to win the Heisman Trophy. 2 out of his 3 big-time throws in this game. I don't know if we would exactly classify them as slot fades, but for all intents and purposes, it was the same route. Like, it was that same sort of veered vertical route where you're starting one way, you've got outside release, and then you're just sort of veering, you're just kind of drifting towards the sideline a little bit. You're getting that space in between where the corner is and where you are, and you're creating that little throwing window to look over your shoulder and for Daniels to just drop it into the bucket. He looks right at home with those throws. Whether it is truly a player from the slot or even somebody who's more like right on the numbers, running that similar of a route, Cliff Kingsbury knows this is when Daniels is at his most confident and comfortable, when he is throwing this kind of route. So they're dialing it up all the time, and he is rewarding them. So just a combination of an offensive coordinator who knows what his quarterback does best, and he is allowing him to have multiple opportunities every single game to showcase it. So Jaden Daniels, unbelievable in this one. I also want to shout out Olamide Zaccheaus. 8 targets, 5 catches, 70 yards, 44 yards after the catch. He had those 2 touchdowns. But Dalton, what was also so impressive about Zaccheaus, maybe his best play of the day, was the screen pass in which he was a lead blocker on Cooper DeJean and pancakes him, gets his hands up and inside. And like, we praised Cooper DeJean, about what he has been as a slot defender, not just because of how well he is in coverage, but also because of what the type of run defender he is, how he can get off of wide receivers' blocks, how he can slip blocks, how he can make those tackles at the line of scrimmage against the quick game and against the screens. He had an opportunity to, and Olamide Zaccheaus got his hands right inside, locked in, and drove DeJean back 5-6 yards and even took him to the ground. And so that was incredibly impressive for me, for a smaller wide receiver who we just think, all right, well, if he's going to be involved in a screenplay, he's going to be the one getting the screen, getting the bubble, whatever it is. He's not going to be the one blocking. He was. So blocking, receiving, after the catch, the big-time touchdowns, Olamide Zaccheaus had a fantastic day, so I wanted to shout him out as my most impressive. What about you? What do you got for most impressive?
So I circling back on one more thing from Daniels, because I think we've kind of framed this as he got around, he won despite everyone else's mistakes around him, and I think we have to remember the drive before the drive, he threw about as bad a ball as he's thrown all season. It was a horrendous ball back across the middle, rolling to his right that he should not have thrown at all. Probably the single most ill-advised ball I've seen him throw all year. And he comes back the next drive and has so not only getting over some mistakes from his teammates, but his own, and being able to shake that off and just go, okay, I still have a shot here. If I score a touchdown, we win anyway. I think that was as impressive to me as anything, because that happened inside the last 4 minutes very easily. And I know that Devontae Smith drop is one of the highlights of this game for Washington for sure. Could have ended the game there, but no, Daniels to bounce back from his own mistake as well is incredible. Daniels won him the game, but the two guys that kept him in this game were their two linebackers that they acquired in this offseason, Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu. You mentioned him in the top 5 there. Wagner especially is just it's incredible to watch him at this age still just be one of the best run defenders, especially in football. 81 run defense grade, 4 stops, had a forced incompletion on a Saquon Barkley wheel that he was beat on, but he kept playing through the end of the play. Also had 2 pressures as a blitzer. Frankie Louvu, I thought, with the interception he had early in the game with Washington down 14-0, this game looked bad early. They weren't stopping the run. Brian Robinson with a couple of fumbles, and Louvu with the interception that then set up Washington's first touchdown. I think it just gave him a little bit of a jolt. And then he had a 71.6 run defense grade in the second half as well. At any point where the Eagles could have run away with this game, I thought Wagner and Louvu kept them in the game. They were spectacular. This was a game where they were everything I expected them to be, and Wagner probably more so, against the toughest opponent on their schedule. Let's be real, especially when it comes to stopping the run, because Barkley had, over 100 yards in the first quarter, and then kind of plodded along after that, as the rest of the Eagles offense did after Jalen Hurts got hurt. But Wagner and Louvu were just terrific on the defensive side. Most disappointing, just, a day full of mistakes for a lot of guys. Tough day for Brian Robinson. 10 carries for only 24 yards and lost 2 fumbles early. His toughest day of the season. I'd expect him to bounce back. We know Washington wants to run the ball and get in his hands, but really tough to have a first half like that, and part of the reason they were in the hole. Again, they got through a boatload of mistakes to win this game, but their best players showed up when it mattered most.
My most disappointing here is Jalen Carter. He's just been really up and down this season, and especially in the second half of the year. 63.1 run defense grade this game, 53.3 pass rush grade in this game. Hasn't had a run defense grade in a single game above 70 since week 9. Hasn't had a pass rush grade in a single game above 71 since week 11. I think Jalen Carter's a more dominant player than that. And so it's more than just this game. It's just more of really the second half of the season overall. Jalen Carter's gone a little bit quiet, or he's been too up and down to really have those highs stand out, because he's also had some of those negative plays that have taken things away. So to me, I would like to see that Carter becomes a little bit more consistently dominant. We're seeing a lot more good than we are bad, and it feels like it's just very high variance for him right now in the second half of the season. So we're just really looking to see a better game from him. So he was a disappointing one for me, because I know the Philadelphia Eagles need him quite a bit. No, Cardinals and Panthers. The Panthers eliminate the Arizona Cardinals from the playoffs here with a 36-30 thrilling overtime victory. Panthers, top 5 graded players in this game, running back Chuba Hubbard, the one who sealed the deal for them in the end, 86.1 overall grade. Cornerback Mike Jackson with a 78.1. Guard Damian Lewis a 77.7. Offensive tackle Ike Ekwonu a 74.6. Wide receiver Adam Thielen to 73.8. Then Bryce Young, an elite 91.7 overall grade in this one. You just love to see it. On the Arizona side of things, running back James Conner at 90.6. Guard Evan Brown with a 74.4. Edge rusher Baron Browning, a 70.4. Center Hyde Froholt with a 68.6. Offensive tackle Jonah Williams with a 68.2. And then Kyler Murray with a 64.0. Your stat that told the story here in this overtime thriller in Charlotte. What
a terrific game this was between two teams most likely not going to the playoffs. This was just a fantastic football game, first off. And I got to tell you something. I think as much as any of the players individually were a reason that Carolina won this game, I think Dave Canales was a huge reason they won this game. And he came out. It started with the very first snap, okay? Carolina lined up in 12 personnel and threw a go ball to the outside because he got man coverage. They were kind of messing around with the Cardinals a little bit. And even though it was incomplete, it was a perfect go ball by Bryce Young that was just dropped. It was as good a ball as he's thrown all year, and there's been a lot of big-time throws lately for Bryce Young. He had 4 more in this game. I'll get there. But that kind of set the tone for the rest of the day. Carolina lined up 21 times with 12 personnel on the field, 1 back and 2 tight ends. And this isn't something we're used to seeing from them. They had their 26 before this game. 26 and 12 personnel rate as an offense. It's not something they've messed around with a lot, extra tight ends and getting into that. But in this game, on those 21 plays, 8.3 yards per play, 6 explosive plays, 3 in the run game, 3 in the pass game, 2 touchdowns, including that game winner you mentioned with Chuba Hubbard in overtime, a 93 offensive grade as a team in 12 personnel with a .454 EPA per play. Just ridiculous. They came in with extra guys out there, and there's a couple of elements to this. One, the Cardinals play a lot of – Jonathan Gannon likes to have 5 defensive linemen on the field, and I think he came into this game feeling like against Carolina's receiving core, and Bryce Young struggling last week against Dallas, who's obviously playing very well. Okay, we're gonna go 5-man front, and we're going to go man coverage, and we feel good about our chances to stop this team. Didn't happen. They lined up 5 D linemen on the field on 47 out of 68 plays. Did not work, run or pass game. Obviously, that's why he gave up 36 points. And I think a fun one for me, on top of Bryce Young being so good in these sets with extra tight ends, it's 12 personnel, but there's also some of those snaps where I think Canales used this game to experiment a little bit with Jatavian Sanders. And some out there might go, why is he about to talk about a guy who didn't even have a catch in this game? Because Sanders, like we saw at Texas, and you and I think both had him as the second best tight end in this rookie class, moving him around the formation, using Tommy Tremble as the traditional wide tight end in-line blocking, and moving Sanders around. Now, sometimes he was in line with Tremble, and they were just mauling people and going with double teams up front, and Chuba was running. But I think the idea that you can have a guy like Sanders, we've seen it all the time with Travis Kelce, with George Kittle, with Brock Bowers. If you have that guy that can do a little bit of both and mess with the personnel and create bad matchups, that's exactly what happened in this game, especially for as much man coverage as Jonathan Gannon was calling. So I think, again, we'll get into the players, and I'm going to get into Bryce Young in a minute. As much as any player or any unit or anything on the field in this game, I think Dave Canales out-prepared and out-coached Jonathan Gannon in this one, and it started with the personnel that he used on offense and how effective they were with it.
Canales has been cooking this second half of the season. I mean, how well Bryce has played since he has come back. And then certainly, like you talked about, balancing the offense, getting the most out of guys like Jalen Coker and Jatavian Sanders and like players like this. I mean, it matters a ton for this team and how well they have been playing. So kudos to Dave Canales. I think it's a really great shout out. My side that told the story is just the Panthers coverage in general. And Marvin Harrison Jr., 38 total receptions, and a player who, I don't disagree with you when you say this. You talk about how Trey McBride a couple of weeks ago was one of those unguardable players that felt like in the NFL for how much success he was having at the tight end spot. 20 receiving yards in this game. And Trey McBride was sort of like a sneaky player who Jonathan Gannon talked about this after last game, and Kyler Murray talked about it this week. Like, oh, we got to get Trey McBride in the end zone because there's just stats that are going around that if Trey McBride doesn't get a touchdown over these next 2 weeks, he will have the most receptions of any player in any NFL season without getting a touchdown. And so you thought to yourself, like, oh, okay, well, they're playing Carolina. And I thought this. I certainly did. When we did the preview show last week, I highlighted the fact that Trevin Wallace and Josie Jewell, their top linebackers, really have struggled in coverage this season. And their safeties have struggled as well. With Fuller and Xavier Woods, like those guys have struggled to cover. And it's just been a tougher coverage unit overall there for Carolina. They really gave the Arizona Cardinals offense fits, and 2 of their go-to players in Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride less than 60 yards receiving between the two of them. For as much as I have said this before, and I really believe this, and they were able to do this a little bit before he went out, you run this offense through James Conner, it's got to be more of a compliment in the passing game than those two guys just having below 60 yards. It's got to be better than that for you to win a football game, especially on the road. And so how the Panthers covered those two guys in particular, I think was a major reason why they ended up winning this football game in the end. So shout out to the Panthers and how well they were able to cover those two fantastic players. Most impressive, who you got?
Look, Panther fans continue week to week, and I think especially after a tough week against Dallas last week, they got to love what they're seeing from Bryce Young, and we got to love what we're seeing from Bryce Young. 92.4 overall grade in this game, and I think it's just the ability to bounce back, the composure, the willingness to throw into tight windows. And if there weren't a couple of big drops and incompletions in this game, we would have looked at Young's numbers and been like, holy hell, what a day he had. I think he played so much better than the box score would tell you. I mentioned the first play of the game, drops a perfect go ball that doesn't get caught. There was another play where there was a corner in the back right corner of the end zone, that perfect ball, big-time throw again. Receiver couldn't get his second foot down out of bounds, would have been a touchdown. There's just throws like that. The throws he is making and the process he's working with right now is just fantastic. I mean, and I look specifically in this game. I mentioned before, Cardinals run a lot of man coverage. 6 of 13, 87 yards. There's a couple of drops mixed in there. 4 big-time throws against man coverage in this game. With, you mentioned it, this set of receivers with Adam Thielen and David Moore and Jalen Coker. I mean, imagine if we got him. I know this. It's an assumption that the Panthers are going to draft a defensive player because we saw in this game, especially in the inside, they need it. But imagine him with a Tetaroa McMillan or something along those lines, or even a veteran, a T. Higgins or something like that, where you go, okay, now we've got a real guy that he can feel really confident making these throws to. And I just think his improvement overall, and I'm going to highlight the man coverage part, on a longer stretch since week 8, since he's really taken this job back over. 84.8 passing grade against man coverage, 5th in the NFL, 10 big-time throws, tied for 1st. I mean, you just see such a different level of processing of defenses. Even, the times the Cardinals went zone, okay, I'll take what you give me. I'll take the shorter throws. I'll check it down. We saw against man also the 34-yard run, the big run that got shown on all the highlights. The other touchdown run, the touchdown run off to the left side. I mean, he's playing with such better instincts, confidence, processing, and just the willingness to throw balls into those windows, because he showed that accuracy at Alabama that he could do that, and then he didn't in the Carolina for a year and a half, and now he's doing it again. And this version of Bryce Young, look, what we've seen since week 8 can be their franchise quarterback. Absolutely. The way he played in this game was just the level of confidence. I don't think there's maybe 5 or 6 quarterbacks in the league right now playing with more confidence than Bryce.
It's funny. I'm staying at my parents' house for the holidays with just to be around family for Christmas. And, my dad and I are just chit-chatting yesterday, and he's asking about a lot of things about the NFL and everything. He's like, what's up with Carolina? Like, what's the biggest difference, like, with Bryce? Like, what's going on with him? And I said to him, it was just a confidence thing. Like, it was always just a confidence thing. Last year, the team was bad around him. So you could say just like the roster, the coaching staff, like last year just wasn't good. But I said to him, even at the beginning of this year, Bryce looked lost. He looked like he had no confidence. And that's the biggest difference through the second half of the season when he has come back and been the starter, is he looks confident. He looks like a confident football player. And I'm glad that you pointed out the single coverage stuff, because that's what I pointed out for the first couple of games when he was playing well. It was like, that's the stat. Like, that's what we need to point to. That shows you confidence, is that he's got to attack these tight window single coverage situations. And you mentioned some of the man coverage situations this week. He's not afraid to do it anymore. He will let it fly. He's got great touch. He's got good anticipation, and he's showcasing that, it feels like, every single week. So another really great week from Bryce, and I agree with you. Panthers fans got to be really excited. They got to be really excited about Chuba Hubbard as well. I know, you sort of signed him to that contract right after you draft Jonathan Brooks, and you go like, man, what are we doing here? Brooks unfortunately goes down with an injury. I think they could have one hell of a 1-2 punch with these two players when Brooks hopefully gets back to full health and maybe even better than he was before. 25 carries for 152 yards for Chuba Hubbard in this one. Also had the game-winning touchdown, which came after just the cleanest broken tackle. I mean, somebody just putting their shoulder straight into him. He bounced right off of it and sprinted straight into the end zone. Like, that has been Chuba Hubbard all season long. So racked up so many stats when he was at Oklahoma State, and he's just doing what's very natural to him now in Carolina. Got rewarded with a big contract, and it's great to see somebody who gets rewarded with a big contract and there's zero drop off, and not only not a drop off. I mean, he looks like he's playing even better. Most disappointing for me in this game and this just season overall is Kyler Murray. You know, we talked about the Arizona Cardinals coming into this season. I was decently bullish on them. I didn't predict them to make the playoffs, since though I think it might be a little bit hypocritical for me to sit here and say, okay, well, just missing out by the playoffs in a couple of games. It's not like I'm overall that far off from what I predicted for this team in the early parts of the season. But they were 6-4 before their bye week in week 11. They were 6-4 at the top of the division heading into their bye week. Kyler Murray at that point in time, in those 4 games right before the bye, so they were 4-0 in those 4 games, which set them up with that record. 78.3 passing grade, 4 big-time throws, and 3 turnover-worthy plays. Since the Week 11 bye, now remember, bye week is supposed to help you, right? You're supposed to get better after the bye week. 65.3 passing grade, so 13 points lower. 5 big-time throws, 8 turnover-worthy plays. Cardinals were 6-4 before the bye. They have gone 1-4 since. Now they are eliminated from the playoffs. I thought when they were 6-4, we were going to have the chance to see a incredible version of Kyler Murray through the remainder of the season, and they were really going to surprisingly compete for that division, because I thought they had done already a lot of the hard work and the heavy lifting to get to that point, and they didn't, and they weren't ready for it. And I think that this year showcased that they are still a year away. Which I don't think is the worst thing in the world, but it is disappointing to me when they were able to get off to such a great start 10 games into the year, being at the top of the division, having a chance to finish the season strong, and they didn't. And Kyler's a reason why they didn't. And I was hoping for something a little bit more consistently close to one of those top years of his career in the NFL. And instead it was just very much a roller coaster since week 11 and since the bye. So that's the most disappointing to me. It's just Kyler Murray's 2024 season, but certainly since the bye week there for him. Who is your most disappointing in this?
Look, if you're going to put all those defensive linemen on the field, you're Arizona, it better work. And it did not work. All these 5-man fronts, it didn't matter how many guys they put out there. It just didn't play well. 49.7 overall. Only pressured Bryce Young on 8 of his 33 dropbacks and a 50.5 run defense grade. So the Cardinals, I think there's a heavy element of this game, as I've already mentioned, where they lost this game in the trenches. And look, do they need more talent on their defensive line? It's something they're going to work on. They need more talent on defense, and I think you're right about Kyler in the passing game. There's just times where their dropback game, I think, looks stiff. Is that the word for it? I think it looks kind of stiff. Like it's almost like they really don't want to do it. They want to stay, in those compressed kind of sets with their tight ends. And I mentioned, I think Trey McBride's been their most consistent weapon all year. But I think they got to get better. I think in obvious passing situations. To me, it's just something. There's been moments we've talked about before against Miami and San Francisco, but their drop back passing game, especially considering the weapons they do have, has not been consistent enough. I'm with you on that.
Minnesota Vikings, the Seattle Seahawks. Minnesota travels all the way out to Seattle for this one and pick up a victory, 27-24. Top 5 graded Minnesota Vikings as the victors in this game. Justin Jefferson at the very top of the list with an 81.5. Edge rusher Pat Jones the second with an 80.1. Safety Josh Metellus with a 77.9. Guard Blake Brandell with a 76.2. And then cornerback Shaq Griffin a 75.3. Sam Darnold in this one. Big time throws for Sam Darnold here, 78.4. Defensive tackle Jerron Reed for the Seattle Seahawks. He's at the top of the list, an 86.5. Cornerback Devon Witherspoon with a 75.9. Wide receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba, 75.8. Cornerback Josh Yob, a 75.4. And then cornerback Tyreek Woolen with a 74.1. Geno Smith in this game, a 68.6. Stat that told the story, Dalton. What do you got?
Okay, I'm just going to circle back to what we said last week, and this team's pass protection, there's a very good chance it's going to sink them out of the postseason. That's where we're at, 37.7 pass blocking grade for Seattle. Geno's doing all he can, grading a 68 when you're under pressure 48% of the time is actually really impressive. It's so hard right now. They got Oluwatimi back at center, but he struggled. Sato Lamea at right guard. He's a guy who shouldn't be out there, honestly. He's just not at an NFL level of pass protection yet. This is what I was worried about last week when I told you with Green Bay where their pass protection completely collapsed, and now it collapsed even further in this game, which doesn't surprise me at all considering they're playing Brian Flores. Brian Flores used the most stunts that he's used in a game since week 4. He knew. He already knew. He goes, I'm gonna get the mug look going in the A gaps. I'm gonna stunt the crap out of this interior, and we're gonna pressure Geno Smith because we know we can. 48% of the time, Geno was under pressure. Both of his interceptions under pressure. One in the first half that led to a field goal. The one at the end of the game that finished it was a 3-point game. That's where we're at. The Seahawks, with where their offensive line is at, especially in the interior, they can't pass protect. And for as good as Geno's been, for as good as Jackson Smith and Jigba's been, for as DK Metcalf, all of that, there is a reason that the Rams, look at the Rams, their offensive line and their pass protection is surging. The Seahawks is falling apart. That's why the Rams have taken over first place. That's where we're at right now. I can't stress it enough. You just cannot be a postseason team, or especially a deep postseason team, with an offensive line playing like this.
On the other side of things, I'm going to give kudos to Sam Darnold specifically in one category. Now, overall, 22 for 35, 246 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, 76.8 passing grade, 2 big-time throws, 2 turnover-worthy plays. Specifically, though, Dalton, I want to praise his play in the red zone. 91.4 passing grade in the red zone. He had one of those big-time throws while he was in the red zone. And remember a couple weeks ago, maybe it's more than a couple weeks ago now at this point, we were talking about Sam Darnold in the red zone, and we were praising Sam Darnold for a great year that he was having, but we were saying, hey, he's close to the league lead in turnover-worthy plays in the red zone. Or at least I think, even at one time, I think he led the NFL in turnover-worthy plays.
I remember the Jacksonville game specifically, yeah.
When he racked up another one, it was like, okay, now I think he's number 1 in the NFL in terms of turnover-worthy plays when we get into the red zone. The Vikings offense at that point was humming along. Everything was going well, including Darnold. Darnold was playing well, but in the end zone, he was taking a lot of unnecessary risks. He was just putting the ball in harm's way, and he was throwing the turnovers when he got into the red area. Since week 11, Sam Darnold, in one of the few areas where he wasn't already playing at such a very high level, 87.3 passing grade, 3 big-time throws, 0 turnover-worthy plays that he has in the red zone. We're running out of areas to go, if you just put Sam Darnold in this situation, he's not going to perform well. I don't know how many we have anymore. Under pressure, he's great. Between the 20s, he's great. Outside the numbers, he's great. Over the middle of the field, he's great. In the red zone, he's great. And again, I go back to what we talked about last week. How do you let this quarterback walk? I don't think you can. So we're all going to go through the offseason exercises of, who's going to sign Sam Darnold. He could go here. He could go here. At this point, I think the Vikings would be crazy to let him go. I think they'd be crazy because of how well he is playing in basically every area that you would want him to play. And like you've mentioned when we talked about this, he's still young. What's he going to be, 27 next year? He's still a young quarterback. He's still got so much time. It's not like you're signing like an old vet. It's actually probably the more ideal situation. Sam's been incredible in the red zone. One area where he really needed to get better, and he absolutely has. Most impressive for me, I will go to actually Seattle side of things. There's a lot of most impressive that we could talk about with Minnesota's, but Jaron Reed, their interior defensive lineman, he's 32 years old. He's on a 1-year contract. He's a free agent this coming off season, and he's still playing at a really high level. This past game, you saw him at number 1 on the list in terms of grades for Seattle players. He had a 91.2 pass rush grade in this game. He beat his defenders on 5 separate snaps, 3 pressures, 30.2 pass rush win percentage, and he's just like a grown man out there. I mean, he was just forklifting and bulldozing the interior defensive lineman for the Minnesota Vikings, the interior offensive lineman, for the Minnesota Vikings, and he was just playing very, very well, even got himself a sack. So Jaron Reed, really nice day from him, impactful performance, and a good year for him going into another free agency season, and he'll be about 33 years old.
Yeah, no, and I'm with you. I'm with you on Darnold, man. I pay the man. I think at this point it's simple. We're running out of things to criticize them for, and look, they're 13-2. The 13-2. They win their last 2 games. They are the top seed. The NFC title goes through Minnesota, which I don't think none of us had preseason. That's for darn sure. You could not find a soul that would say, "Oh yeah, the Vikings have a chance to go 15-2 in the 1 seed." Yeah, that makes sense, right? I mean, pay the man. I get it. JJ McCarthy, I'll figure that out later. I wouldn't even worry about it. You can't have a guy playing at this level walk out the door. And I think if you're Darnold with the weapons and the situation and the familiarity with Kevin O'Connell, I don't think you want to leave either. I wouldn't. Would you want to? Let's say the open spot is the team that gets left out of Cam Ward or Sanders right now. What if it's the Raiders? Would you go to the Raiders right now if you were Sam Darnold? Over this team,
No.
Over this team that you're on now, absolutely not.
No.
I think they have to figure out a way to get that done. Pay the man. I got to talk about a guy they paid this past off season though, and again, I think I've probably done it 3 or 4 times this year. Andrew Van Ginkel, what a great ad for this defense, and I want to highlight what he did in the second half of this game because sometimes they talk about as pass rushers, you need a closer. That's the numbers of a closer right there. That's the Mariano Rivera of football right there is what that is, closing. 90.1 pass rush grade in the second half, 6 pressures, 2 sacks. I mean, and he's all over the place. When I talk about Brian Flores running these stunts, it's because Van Ginkel could be anywhere from the edge to the A-gap to the slot to linebacker to wherever. He's just a football player. He's not, it's not the same as a Trey Hendrickson or a Myles Garrett where you know where he is every play. You have no idea where he is on any given play. I think it's one of the biggest problems when you're trying to block Minnesota is just where the hell is he? Because we don't know. Again, in the A-gap, he could be twisting around the center. In the other A-gap, he could be, head up on your tackle and speed rushing by him. I mean, there's so many options that Van Ginkel gives Brian Flores. Once again, the perfect player, just the perfect player to be in this exact defense, and he has been everything that they paid for. Honestly, an absolute bargain considering what they gave him. Van Ginkel in the second half of this game, absolute monster.
Yeah, he's been the perfect player for Brian Flores, like you mentioned. Most disappointing for me is Seahawks run game, but more of just the philosophy towards the run game. I know Kenneth Murray is sort of coming back, but 12 designed carries in this game, the running backs, despite barely being out of a 1-score game all day. There was a point in time where it was a 10-point deficit. It was 7-17, but most of this game was a 1-possession game, and you only ran the football 12 times. You had the offensive line that we've talked about, and you're asking them to pass protect that entire game. I like Ryan Grubb. I think he's incredibly aggressive. I think that he sticks to his guns. And I think he calls a game plan the way that you need to go get big wins in this league. So I do like him. But there have been a handful of games where I'm like, you've got to run the football more. You've got to be more balanced by design or balanced by game plan than the Seahawks have. And I understand when you're struggling along the offensive line, you're probably going to struggle to run the football too. But 12 designed carries for a team that gives up as much pressure as the Seattle Seahawks do on the offensive line, and for a game that was barely outside of a 1-score game the entire time, is just not nearly as balanced as you need to be, in my opinion. So to me, that's the most disappointing part. The philosophy towards the run game, I think, is putting a lot on Geno Smith's shoulders. I think it's putting on a lot of unnecessary stress on an offensive line that we already know has been struggling. So that was disappointing to me. Anything else before we get out of here?
No, just the most disappointing thing. It's something I've kind of harped on the last couple of weeks. Just their playoff hopes are getting slimmer and slimmer. And I'm pretty sure with Green Bay already beating them and the way conference records are with Washington, I'm not even sure it's possible for Seattle to get a wild card spot. I think it really is going to come down to now. Next week, they have to beat the Bears. That's a must-win, and obviously they're favored. But, with this offensive line, you never know what happens. And then that Rams game in Week 18, it's just going to come down to that. And right now, I can't say I'd give Seattle the advantage with the way the Rams' defensive line is playing, the way the Rams are playing on both sides in the trenches, and then this Seattle offensive line. I have it's 2 weeks to go, and it's still entirely possible if they beat the Rams, but I wouldn't favor them in that scenario right now.
Patriots and Bills, next game that we're hitting here. Buffalo wins this one 24-21, a lot closer than I think people thought that it was going to be. Top 5 graded Buffalo Bills here in this one. Edge rusher Von Miller an 83.0. Defensive tackle Ed Oliver an 81.7. Offensive tackle Deion Dawkins a 78.2. Cornerback Teron Johnson with a 71.8, and then cornerback Christian Benford a 71.6. Josh Allen in this one a 68.2. And then on New England side, safety Marte Mapu with a 83.8. Center Ben Brown a 79.8. Tight end Austin Hooper with a 79.3. Cornerback Jonathan Jones a 76.1. Tight end Hunter Henry a 75.1. And then Drake May in this game did struggle, a 54.0 overall grade. What was your stat that told the story here?
New England had him on the ropes and then just kind of fell apart in the second half. Too many big mistakes. Yep. I mean, so they're up 14-7 at half. The Bills come out in their first drive and they score. Okay, cool. We got a tie game. Ramondre Stevenson then fumbles. Bills go ahead. Then, you had a Drake May interception on a really good drive from the Patriots, and then a Drake May interception to the right corner in the end zone that I couldn't tell if he underthrew it or a miscommunication or what happened on that throw, but either way, interception in the end zone. Then you had the backwards pass to Ramondre Stevenson that he dropped and ended up being a fumble that I believe it was Taron Johnson recovered for a defensive touchdown for the Bills. You have all these turnovers resulting in 10 points for the Bills that ended up putting them up 24-14. And that was pretty much it from there. I mean, and Drake May, after a million penalties down in that goal-to-go scenario, they scored a touchdown, but, couldn't get the ball back. A 57.7 offensive grade in the second half of this game. On the road against a team like the Bills, you have to play 4 quarters, and the Patriots only played 2 without all the mistakes. So those mistakes, that cost them a ball game where I think they really had the Bills on the ropes for the first half of it.
Yeah, the second half turnovers was my most disappointing that I was going to mention. They were up 14-7 going into the half, and then they came out in the second half and went fumble, interception, fumble. Whoops, that's it. You're playing the Buffalo Bills. I mean, you can't expect for something like that to happen, especially when one of those fumbles is a backwards pass that the Buffalo Bills then pick up at, the 1-yard line? I think they picked it up at the 1.
Scored on the goal line, actually scored on that play.
So they scored on that play. So, I mean, it was just, you can't be giving the Bills those kind of advantages. You knew they were going to come back, and even though they barely win the football game, the second half turnovers are a big reason why. Stat that told the story for me that I really loved, the Bills' resilience in the run game. We just talked about how Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator of the Seattle Seahawks, it feels like he does not have enough designed runs just overall in his game plan, whether it's a close game or not. I love the fact that Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, continued to run the football, knowing that is what they needed to stay balanced and stay correct on the offensive side of things, even when they were down 7-14-0. You were down 2 scores, it's at home, and they went, all right, calm down, everybody breathe. Let's get back to Buffalo Bills football. We know we can win this game. They did not sit here and go, oh, we've got an MVP caliber quarterback. Let's just put the ball in his hands and let's completely abandon the run game. That is not what they did. And at the end of the day, the stat book was very favorable for them when it came to their rushing attack. Obviously, James Cook's numbers looks the best because he had the 48-yard run, but 11 carries and 100 yards and 9.1 average for James Cook. But again, when you don't abandon the run, you give yourself the opportunity for your explosive runners to make explosive runs in the game. And I think that is just, again, that is more evidence to why I love the Buffalo Bills doing what they were doing. Josh Allen in this game had 6 designed carries for 30 yards. Ty Johnson had 6 carries for 30 yards. Both of them 5.0 yards per carry average. A little bit of a struggle for Ray Davis, just 12 yards on 5 carries. But still, the philosophy was the same. They did not abandon the run game. They did not become one-dimensional. They did not fold to probably what the Patriots wanted them to be. And instead they said, no, we are still the better football team. We've got plenty of time to prove it. And the way that we do that is by playing our game. They did. They won the game in the end. So the run game mentality and resilience, to me, is the stat that told the story and allowed Buffalo to score enough points to win this football game. Who is your most impressive here in this one?
Yeah, I think it's really impressive, just to jump on that real quick, that they can kind of beat you left-handed a little bit. They can turn around and beat you any style they want. It's not just, you mentioned it. I think you're absolutely right, asking Josh Allen to do more. But if you're going to stick with that run game, well, you have an offensive line play like this. And I think you saw Deion Dawkins in that top 5, but 4 of their 5 starters graded above a 70 in this game. They only allowed 4 pressures in pass protection. So even though they were struggling to throw the ball a little bit, at least Josh Allen wasn't getting hit all day, and it was just, okay, the Patriots covered well. That's fine. It is what it is. At least it wasn't because he was under pressure and your offensive line played poorly. I think this is a unit that has played quietly very well all season. I know we've got some star-studded offensive lines in the league. We talk about the Colts and the Eagles and Detroit, teams like that every single week. But the Bills very quietly, and sometimes there's 6 offensive linemen out there, they've played well all season. And I think the fact that, like you mentioned with the entire offense, but the fact that the offensive line can turn around and flip like this, they can play a running game like this, or in the snow against San Fran, they can pass protect well. They got a little bit of everything up front too that just makes it work. It's a tough unit, and one I think sometimes that doesn't get enough credit.
My most impressive, I will go to the Patriots. Obviously, it was a tough game to lose, especially when they were up 14-0. But Marte Mapu played incredibly well, and we talked about him as the number 1 player on the grades list for the New England Patriots. But he had a fantastic day. 83.3 overall grade, 90.6 run defense grade, and a 65.7 coverage grade. And really, that coverage grade I think is lower than it should be. I mean, he's got 4 targets, 2 catches allowed, and the 2 catches allowed. Okay, that's obviously a reason why. But he had an interception, which he doesn't get a lot of credit for the interception because it was really just a bad Josh Allen pass that sort of went right to him in the end zone. But the dropped interception was an incredible play. I mean, he was sort of playing that robber / over the middle defender role where he was coming down a little bit from a 2 safety alignment. There was somebody who was doing a deep cross over the middle. He immediately, gets hip to hip with him. He's playing coverage so well that when the ball comes their way, he is able to undercut that immediately. If he would have come away with that one, I think the coverage grade's a lot higher. But he put himself in position to make that play, and some of the run defense stops as well that he had in this one. Marte Mapu, I thought, was fantastic and one of the better players on the field for either team. I already said that my most disappointing was the Pats' second half turnovers. Did you have another most disappointing that you wanted to talk about here before we moved on?
Yeah, I'm just still this game did nothing to quell my concerns on the Bills linebackers. Matt Milano was inactive. Terrell Bernard played a decent game, but Balen Spector, first playing in Milano's place, 27.7 overall grade before he left with an injury. Dorian Williams came in the rest of the game and played to a 42.2. If they don't get a healthy, effective version of Milano back for the playoffs, I'm very worried, especially when it comes to playing the Chiefs or the Ravens. The Bills have the lowest graded linebacker unit in the league, Trevor. The next closest team is 9 points above them. It's just, is the interior is also inconsistent on their D-line, but this linebacker, I'm so scared if they have to play the Ravens. Because we've already seen it once, right? When Derrick Henry just ran through them like it was nothing. I'm extremely worried if they have to play Baltimore or even Kansas City with their interior in the playoffs, that these linebackers, unless they get Milano back at the Matt Milano that we're used to seeing, that's the part that would worry me the most in those matchups.
Definitely need him. They definitely need his presence. He is a Super Bowl caliber type of a player for you in the middle of that defense. And when you don't have that type of a player, it gets a lot more difficult to hoist that Lombardi trophy. There's no doubt about it. Jags and the Raiders. Some people might look at this game and go, don't really care.
Who actually won, though? This is the thing.
That's the thing. This, to me, was the most entertaining game of the entire week. Oh, playoff scenario, whatever. I'm a draft guy. Screw that. You got 2 teams that are fighting for a top 5 overall pick. And by fighting, I mean they're trying to win the football game. The Jags had the number 1 overall pick, I think it was 4 weeks ago, when they beat the Titans and they dropped all the way down to 4 or 5. I can't remember exactly where they were at the time when they exactly dropped, but they dropped from number 1 all the way to that spot. The Raiders they had a Hail Mary chance, almost beat the Falcons last week. And if they would have won, they would have dropped all the way from number 1 to number 6. That's exactly what happened this time around, because the Raiders win this game 19-14, and they dropped from number 1 overall in the draft order to number 6. The Jags just slowly climbing back up after that win against the Titans. So they're not back at number 1 overall, but they're slowly getting back up there. The top 5 graded players for the Las Vegas Raiders, because they did win the football game. Maybe didn't win in the grand scheme of things, but they did win this football game. Tight end Brock Bowers, 81.5 overall grade. Offensive tackle Colt Miller, a 79.0. Linebacker Robert Spillane with a 78.5. Offensive tackle DJ Glaze, a 77.7. And then linebacker Devine Diablo with a 76.4. Aiden O'Connell in this one, a 67.1. And then the other side of things for Jacksonville, safety Andrew Wingard, a 77.4. Wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. 76.5. Guard Ezra Cleveland is 73.6. Tight end Luke Farrell with a 73.3. Defensive tackle Jeremiah Ledbetter a 70.3. And quarterback Mac Jones a 72.4 in this one. Stat that told the story. What do you got?
Okay, so as far as just the reasons that the game were won or lost, or in quotes, won or lost or whatever, we just had a split with the Jaguars where they got a pass rush for 1 quarter and then didn't for 3. And Aiden O'Connell, even though there was a lot of throws in clean pockets that he missed, at least he wasn't getting teed off on. He had opportunities to make those throws. First quarter, Raiders dropped back to throw 7 times. Pressured on 5 of them, 2 sacks. Jags had a 74.6 pass rush grade. Last 3 quarters, 34 dropbacks, only pressured on 7 of those, just over 20%. No sacks, 52.2 pass rush grade. I don't know, maybe I don't want to say it's the quiet quitting part of, hey, we just, we got our draft stock a little bit better here by losing this game. But, you look at those numbers and you go, all right, they rushed the passer for the first quarter to make it look good. And then we kind of laid off a little bit, and Aiden O'Connell still kept them in the game. But anyway, the Jags didn't get a pass rush. Certainly there's some weeks where they do with Josh Hines-Allens and Trayvon Walker and even Eric Armstead in the middle, but not in this game, especially for the last 3 quarters.
When I think about a stat that told the story, I do think about the Raiders' offensive line. And they're playing well. I think that when we examine this team for a rebuild, or when we were fixing the franchise on NFL Stock Exchange, we looked at the offensive line. And I think people might look at the offensive line with the Raiders and think that it needs a lot more work than it does. And I think that they proved that once again this week. 79.2 overall offensive grade for the Raiders' offensive line. 79.3 run blocking grade and a 77.1 pass blocking grade. All but one Raiders offensive lineman graded above a 70.0. So just really strong all around. DJ Glaze and Cole Miller were the 2 highest graded players, but also Jackson Powers Johnson was above a 70. And overall, I think the offensive line was playing really well in general. So Raiders offensive line to me is stats that told the story, because really as we go forward here for the Raiders, the offensive line is not nearly as big of a rebuild as people might think that would be the case for a team that's struggling as much as they are. Defensive line, they've got Max Crosby. In theory, they'll have a fully healthy Christian Wilkins next season. Again, you're still hoping that Tyree Wilson is going to continue to get better. He's certainly shown more flashes this year than he ever has. And so if he continues to get better, Divine Diablo, depending on what's happening with him this offseason, right? I mean, you've actually got some decent players in the trenches for the Raiders. You need that quarterback, no doubt about it. And you need to kind of figure things out at the passing attack and the running back position as well. But Raiders offensive line, it was just another game that was evidence to the fact that they're not nearly as bad as people might think that they are. So they were the stat that told the story to me. Most impressive was Brian Thomas Jr. Jags absolutely nailed it at wide receiver in the first round last year. 12 targets, 9 catches, 132 yards, a touchdown, a 62-yard long catch. And they're using him in all different situations, right? It's not just those deep catches that we saw at LSU. He's the quick game player, slants, screens, things like that. I mean, they are emphasizing him as the main go-to guy. They're running concepts where they've got clear out routes and they've got ways to just get him open, get him one-on-one opportunities. They're building the entire passing attack around him in so many ways, more than just telling him to go deep like he did at LSU. He is becoming a more complete receiver before our eyes, and he is an incredibly impressive player that has crossed the 1,000-yard mark this season. So great season for Brian Thomas Jr., another great game from him. What about you? What was your most impressive here?
Same thing. A rookie pass catcher that went over the 1,000-yard mark and has just had a spectacular season. Brock Bowers, I'll tell you, the Raiders need a lot of things, but they don't need a tight end. And you mentioned it. There's so much of this offense where the ball's designed to go to him and optimize the skill set. 11 catches, 99 yards. 6 of those catches went for first downs and 62 yards after catch. And that's always the part that gets me with Bowers is at Georgia, one of the best after-the-catch tight ends we've ever seen, if not the best. And he's carried that into the league. 81.6 receiving grade. The centerpiece of their offense right now, an offense that certainly is struggling to find foundational players. And, I think quarterback, receiver, running back, everything else, they're going to be looking for this offseason, but they know they've got a top-notch tight end. He's at least a top 5 tight end right now. You could argue he's been the best tight end in football this season. When you think about got a 1,000-yard season with the quarterbacks that he's had to play with this year, just incredible what Brock Bowers is doing. I think there are going to be some people who make the arguments that he's actually the rookie of the year. I would still go with Jaden Daniels, but man, oh man, what Brock Bowers is doing is just special. And there's still 2 games left. We could get a 1,200-yard season out of him in his first year on this team with these quarterbacks. That's just incredible. I don't know what else we can say about Brock Bowers. I'm sure we've had him in this spot at least half the games this year, and it's well-deserved.
Most disappointing for me is just the Raiders in the draft order. Mentioning their fall from 1 to 6. They play the Saints next week in New Orleans, and obviously, in New Orleans, it's tough to play, but legitimate chance they could win that football game, right? Given this state of the Saints and where they have been in the second half of this season, especially with the how unreliable their quarterback position is, I should say. They could win that football game, and if they win that football game within the span of 2 weeks, the Raiders will have gone from the number 1 overall pick to number 9. Significantly bad for a team that desperately needs a quarterback. Thankfully, this year, there's still a chance that they could get a quarterback. Not at 9. They probably have to trade up, but it's not like these are quarterbacks where no matter where teams are drafting, they're not going to move because they've got these quarterback situations where they're not going to want to move off of it, and they'll be able to draft ones. But if you have to jump from number 9 back into the top 3 to get a quarterback, it's going to cost you a pretty penny. And I know they're trying to win football games, and I'm trying to not be too much of a draft head because these are coaches and players that are playing games for their future game checks and their future contracts and their livelihood, and I get all that. From a rebuilding perspective, it is much, much, much more difficult for them to do what they need to do, picking at number 9 than it is number 1 overall. So that's all I'll say.
I think even at number 6, because my biggest problem with this drop is there's 2 teams that concern me in this race that they fell behind when you talk about, we really think there's 2 first-rounder top 10 quarterbacks that are worthy, right? They fell behind Tennessee and Cleveland, and we know Tennessee's looking for a quarterback. And Cleveland, look, I don't think their roster is ready for a rookie quarterback next year, and there's the whole Watson situation, but I don't think I could take it off the table either if one of those two guys was available to them. So I think it's not just that you fell, it's that the teams you fell behind are also quarterback needy teams. And now you're looking at, okay, do we need the Titans to find a way to win another game here with Mason Rudolph? And if we're behind them, come draft time, do we have to trade up? Do we still have to trade back up to that 2nd or 3rd spot to get ahead of those teams? And, if the Giants are going to stay at number 1, so be it. They're going to get their pick. But I think that's what would concern me the most is who they fell behind, not just the fact that they fell.
Niners Dolphins next game. I was looking to see if we have one left before Thursday Night Football, and we do. Niners Dolphins. Miami wins this one 29-17. Let's take a look at the top 5 graded Miami Dolphin players here in this one. Devon Achane with an 89.5 overall grade at the very top of the list. Offensive tackle Teron Armstead with an 85.5. Tight end Johnny Smith with a 78.4. Cornerback Kader Kohu a 78.4. And then wide receiver Tyreek Hill a 72.3. Tua Tagovailoa in this one a 72.2 overall grade. On San Francisco's side of things, Deebo Samuel an 89.4. Linebacker D. Winters an 83.9. Tight end George Kittle an 80.3. Edge rusher Nick Bosa 71.9. Guard Dominic Pooney a 69.5. And then Brock Purdy in this game a 71.5. What's your stat that told the story here, Dalton?
Yeah, with all the running back injuries with the 49ers, McCaffrey, Mason, Garendo, let me know if I'm missing any, and we're down to Patrick Taylor at running back or Deebo Samuel playing running back and actually leading the team in designed rushing yards in this game, which tells you all you need to know. A stat for me is the 49ers in this game only called run plays on 26.6% of their plays. And this is a team that their offense is just not designed to function like that. They just can't. They go into this game at a disadvantage because they're handcuffed offensively. It's not designed to have Brock Purdy dropping back and throwing the football 40 times because we can't run the football. Last year, they led the league in percentage of run calls. Over the last 5 years, across the last 5 years, I should say, they've led the league in percentage of run calls. They want to run the football, and right now they're just incapable of doing it. 15 designed run calls. Their fewest in a game in over 3 years. They just can't operate like this, and they got outrushed on design runs in this game, 166-57. So I think the Niners at this point offensively, They just don't have enough pieces. They Trent Williams still out. Brandon Ayuk obviously done for the year. All the running backs, and I think all those running back injuries. There's been times in the past where maybe they lose a guy here and there, and somebody's banged up, but we can still run the football. A Kyle Shanahan offense that's incapable of running the football. I mean, we've kind of seen it with the Bears, where if you can't run the ball, it's just not going to happen. They're not going to get anywhere. And in this game, that was just the case. As Miami could be more two-dimensional because at least they have their horses.
On the other side of things, yeah, Miami, their rush success, I think, is the reason why they were able to win this game. Devon Achane, 120 rushing yards on 17 carries, an efficient, explosive day there, 78.7 rush grade, that's his highest since week 11. And then when it comes to how that complements the passing game, Tua, 9 for 13 on play action, 91 passing yards. Now, I know that you don't have to run the football well for play action to still be effective, but it helps when you do, right? When you are more of a threat, then yes, it only increases how much the defense mentally is going to look at and be ready for defending the run. But when you're running the ball well, so it's not 100% you have to run the ball to be good at play action thing, but there's no doubt about it that when you are good at running the football, when you are that explosive, it's going to help. It's always going to make it a little bit easier. So Miami's rush success to me is a way that they were able to stay balanced. And it's been a missing key of their offense, I think, all season. Yeah, we talked about the passing struggles and the efficiency struggles, all that goes into it. But the main missing component of what the Dolphins have had over the last 2 years they don't have this year is the consistent explosiveness within their run game. And this game was a step or a throwback. I was going to say step in the right direction, more of a throwback to what they have been the previous 2 seasons and how the offense was able to flow outside of that. Most impressive to me, really quick, I'll go to their slot corner, Kader Kohou, who over the last 2 weeks have put together 2 really nice performances. Over these last 2 weeks, he has allowed 3 catches for a total of 0 yards. It was -3 yards last week. It was 3 yards this week. So a total of 0 yards allowed over the last 2 weeks. He has an interception. He has a forced incompletion. And this week he had a 2.8 quarterback rating when he was thrown to. So back-to-back really good weeks for Kader Kohou, who has the ability to string together and show us some really good performances in the slot that we have seen over the last 3 years during his Dolphins career. Who's your most impressive here in this one?
Look, I'm just noticing now after all these games that I've worked a ton of offensive linemen in these spots. It feels like that's apparently all I was watching this week. And I got another one for you. Look, when the Dolphins have a healthy and effective Teron Armstead, they're a different offense. I've said it all year, and that was the case again in this game. 89.1 pass blocking grade, 37 reps. I have 37 reps and did not lose a single rep in pass protection. 79.4 run blocking grade, led the team. 92.2 overall grade this season. 92.2. The only tackle better is Jordan Mailata, who's at closing in. He's like around a 96. I got to look into historical stuff with Mailata right now. But Teron Armstead, when he's in there and he's 100%, one of the elite tackles in football still, and he makes such a huge difference. I've said it all year with this Dolphins offensive line. That's a big reason that they ran the ball well. This might have been their best rushing day of the season. Tua was protected. Everything went right up front because Armstead was so good up front. Just another terrific game from a terrific player.
Let's see. My most disappointing, I think the Aaron Banks injury is the one that stands out to me. MCL injury in the fourth quarter. Didn't look pretty. He's a free agent this upcoming offseason. And so that sucks. That sucks for him. It could have been a guy that the 49ers were going to bring back. Maybe they're still going to bring him back. But to now go into a free agency offseason with a major knee injury sucks. And that's tough. It's been a struggle of a year for the San Francisco 49ers. I feel like we could point out plenty of things just like we have really over the last 8 weeks, but feels a little bit tired to kind of pile on them. And it's just not a good year. It's not their year. They're not playing together. They're going through injuries. And unfortunately, another injury that they suffered here this week is to a guy who is about to hit free agency. And now he's going to have that clouding what could have been a nice payday for him. I still hope, obviously, he gets it because I think he's a solid offensive starter in this league. But that's just a real bummer that his season's going to end like this and suffering a knee injury this late in the process going into free agency. So that's my most disappointing. What's your most disappointing?
For me, just a strangely tough game for Fred Warner. 54.4 overall, 51 in run defense, allowed 3 catches for 41 yards. Just a weird stretch, not just this game. 4 of his last 5 games, he's graded under a 60. Which just how we were talking about him early in the season, he was arguably through 9-10 weeks, he was best linebacker in football, and it's just been a struggle lately. And look, I think a bigger part of it is that everything's caved in around him, all the defensive line injuries and, just everything going on in that 49ers defense, has maybe just kind of leaked to him a little bit where it's like he just can't carry the load like that. But it was just an oddly tough day and an oddly tough stretch for Fred Warner. We're not used to seeing that.
Last game that we have here, we'll go back to Thursday Night Football. We'll talk about Broncos at Chargers. The Chargers ended up winning this game 34-27, more high scoring than a lot of people thought that this one was going to be between these two teams. Los Angeles Chargers, their top 5 graded players, defensive tackle Tyir Tart with a 92.9. Fullback Scott Matlock with an 83.8. You'd love to see that. Tight end Tucker Fisk with an 82.0, defense tackle Poona Ford with a 77.0, and then wide receiver Josh Palmer, 74.7. Quarterback Justin Herbert in this one, a 78.2 overall grade. On Denver side of things, defense tackle Malcolm Roach with an 84.9. Cornerback Chris Abrams-Drain, a 75.7. Defensive tackle DJ Jones, a 74.6. Guard Quentin Miners with a 73.6. Cornerback Jaquan McMillan, a 72.8. Then Bo Nix struggled in this one, a 62.6 overall grade. What was your stat that told the story here from Thursday Night Football, Dalton?
It's cold pretty much everywhere in the country right now except for L.A., but the Broncos offense decided to bring the cold weather with them because after their first 3 drives, they just completely froze. You like that one? I tried. First 3 drives, 7.9 yards per play, 21 points, 5 explosive plays. They were just terrific. Last 7 drives, 3.8 yards per play, less than half of what it was the first 3. Only 6 points, only 2 explosive plays in the last 7 drives. It just completely stalled out. I think Bo Nix's average depth of target was under 4 yards. We've seen it times this year with this Broncos offense. The explosiveness just goes away. And throwing downfield especially and trying to get into high-scoring games like this is not going to be where they're living. In the last 2 weeks, we got to be honest, Bo Nix has struggled. And the fact that Denver has yet to clinch a playoff spot is in large part, I would say, because their offense it's really slowing down now. And now they got a huge, huge game coming up against Cincinnati next week. You don't want to try to get in a shootout with Joe Burrow. I think they need to figure out a way to get back to the ball control sort of offense. Bo Nix making those intermediate throws where guys can make opportunities happen after the catch. Their offense really did it. It froze, especially in the second half and the later stages of this game. They just couldn't find any explosive plays, and it was too methodical. 6 points in 7 drives for that long a stretch of a game is really hard to win with, even though their first 3 drives went so well.
And it felt like the Chargers could have won this game with even more definity if the run defense didn't struggle. And this is a group that we pointed out before. There's a discrepancy between how the Chargers have played with teams that are above 500 and teams that are below 500. Broncos a 78.8 rushing grade last Thursday, 5.1 yards per carry average as a team. The Chargers a 68.9 run defense grade versus Denver. They've had a 72.7 run defense grade this season, but they've sort of been trending in the wrong direction. A 60.6 the week before. And then, of course, like I just said, a 68.9 against Denver. It worries me a little bit with them going into the postseason, if we're going to be a postseason team, which it feels like they're going to be a postseason team, being able to stop the run, because that's an above 500 team that they're going to be playing, and it's a team that's probably going to really know how to run the football. So against bad teams, they've been able to stop it pretty well, but against teams that know what they want to do, against teams that are above 500, they haven't had as much success. So this was another example of that. The Broncos, I thought, ran the ball decently well, or I should just say efficiently, against the Chargers, and they're going to have to really step it up once they get into a playoff. So I thought that was the stat that told the story, because the lack of run defense, I think, kept this game a little bit closer than it should have been. My most impressive, Tyir Tart. He was the top-graded player for the Los Angeles Chargers. 90.6 pass rush grade from the big man in the middle. He only had 1 pressure and a 26.7 pass rush win percentage, but there were 3 separate plays which he beat his offensive linemen individually. So there was success from him. That's why the pass rush win percentage is up. Even with him only registering 1 pressure, he was still able to win clean a handful of times, and that's why you see the grade pretty high from him. So wanted to recognize him for a really good game, because what this segment is all about, sometimes shouting out those guys that are beyond just the common box score. So I'll shout out to Tyir Tart here for a good Thursday Night Football performance. What about you? Your most impressive and most disappointing?
Impressive. I almost did it, Trevor. I almost went Scott Matlock, because fullbacks are people too. But
you probably should have, honestly.
I probably should have. I almost did it. He was really good. The Chargers, they ran all their power schemes, and he was leading through on all those. He was really good. But, watching the tape, I had to go with Justin Herbert under pressure. He was pressured pressured on 54% of his dropbacks. And this is what he did with that. I mean, especially in the second half, I think Gus Edwards had some big runs to finish it off, but Herbert put this team on his back under pressure. When you're talking about 13-16 with 2 big-time throws, the only mistake he made was the interception to Chris Abrams' drain, but outside of that, just spectacular. When you're under pressure over half the time in a game as a quarterback, you're supposed to lose. That's just how it works. It's supposed to look more like what Geno Smith in Seattle would happen there, where you throw a game-ending interception because you're just under pressure way too often. Justin Herbert just kept his cool. The touchdown throw that gave him the lead when he's rolling to his left, that's silly. There's only 2 or 3 other guys even capable of making that throw. Herbert under pressure, I thought, he was the best offensive player again in this game for the Chargers. He's having, maybe the traditional numbers don't look like a Burrow or a Lamar or an Allen, but he's having a fantastic year, and he really willed this team to a win and most likely willed them to the playoffs. They just have to win one game against, I believe it's either the Patriots or the Raiders, and Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert are going to get the Chargers to the playoffs, barring an absolute disaster in the last 2 weeks. And then most disappointing for me, tough night to be a Broncos linebacker. Cody Barton and Justin Strnad especially. 34.6 overall for Barton, 28.7 for Strnad. I think they really took some poor angles in the run game. It was tough. You wonder why Scott Matlock had such a high grade in run blocking and lead blocking through, because he was getting the better of these 2 guys. And then even in coverage, allowed 9 catches for 107 yards combined. Really, really tough night. And I think the Chargers, as the night kept going on, they found more and more ways to attack the Broncos linebackers. That was the weak spot for their defense in this game.
My most disappointing is just Bo Nix. It was not a game where I felt like had the opportunity to step up a little bit more. It just was a more quiet game from him. It wasn't the worst game that we have seen from him this year, but 29 for 40 passing, 263 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, but no big-time throws, no turnover-worthy plays as well, but a 59.8 passing grade there from Nix. And so in a quarterback's duel, Justin Herbert clearly won this one. And obviously, it's just something that with Nix being a rookie, second half of the season's been pretty good for him. But it was an opportunity where I feel like he could have been a little bit better, and he just wasn't. And that's not the worst thing in the world, but it's just sort of worth pointing out, because I would have liked to see him play a little bit better, given the magnitude of what this game was. So it was just a little bit disappointing for me. There we go. All 16 games that we have here in the NFL. Well, I should say 15, because we got one more for Monday Night Football. Hope you guys enjoy that, obviously. But the 15 games right here, all reviewed and given to you with the PFF grades. If you liked what you saw, if you liked what you heard with a lot of these PFF premium stats, you can get those for yourself by going over to PFF.com and getting yourself a PFF Plus subscription. It's the premium stats, but it's so much more as well. When we get into the offseason, it's the free agency tools, it's the fully unlocked mock draft simulator, the PFF draft guide, all that great stuff. A subscription for PFF is something that we're giving to the football fans 365 year round. So it's not just an in-season thing. It's so much more than that. So if you don't have one, make sure you go get one. We got 2 weeks left, just 2 more weeks of the regular season. I'm excited to see how this plays out. We mentioned a couple of games, divisions that are coming down to the very end. We get the scheduling of week 18 going on. And obviously what happens for week 17 is going to mean a lot for that. Just so you guys know, we're upping the preview show one day. So we're going to be live tomorrow at 1 p.m. So the same time that this show started, we're going to be back here again, myself and Carmen Vitale, because we've got the Christmas Day games on Wednesday, then the Thursday Night Football game, then the Saturday games, and the Sunday games. So a long stretch of football throughout the week, which means we got to give you the preview a day early. We will be back at 1 p.m. Eastern to be able to do all of that. But for this show, I'm Trevor Sikkema. That's Dalton Wasserman saying thank you guys so much for watching this Week 16 review show. We will see you in 24 hours to preview Week 17. See you guys then.